Hi friends, CA Chandan Patni this side, and in this video I am going to discuss the so-called amendments in EIS for May 22 exam and onwards. Okay, now let me be very clear guys, when it comes to amendments, okay, don't students generally have this tension in their minds that there are so many amendments and all, so many additions and all in the course. So let me be very clear, when I say amendments in EIS, it is not like the amendments that we have in taxation and all. Amendments can be in the form of some slight changes in the content, which I generally call it as improvisation of the content, improvement in the content. Okay, there can be shifting of some content from, I'll show you certain changes wherein some topics of chapter number 3 have been shifted to, let's say, chapter number 1, and there are some very minute, very few additions of new concepts as such. Okay, so I am going to give you an overview of the kind of topics, amendments and changes that we have, and then we am going to do a detailed study of the changes that has been made. Okay, so nothing to worry as such guys. If I say that there is only one or two hardly major additions wherein new concepts needs to be learned, else everywhere the concept is same, it is just the improvement in the content. So you don't have to worry at all, even if you have watched the old lectures. But yes, of course, go through this amendment notes, you will be able to, things will be very simple for you. Okay, amendment notes already uploaded on the Telegram channel. I'll put it in the description box below, so in case you haven't checked it yet, please download it from the Telegram channel. Okay, now 5 chapters. Let me just first give you an overview as to where do we have the so-called amendments. Okay, so let me just begin with chapter number 1. In chapter number 1, the first change is basically, if you remember, we covered the concept of risk management strategies. Okay, so earlier there were 5 strategies. One was, let's say, tolerate, accept the risk, terminate, eliminate the risk, transfer the risk, treat or mitigate the risk. But now from May 22, they have removed the fifth strategy, turn back. Okay, so they have just removed it. Okay, but of course it is a strategy. Okay, there were 5 T's, now it is only 4 T. Okay, so this is first amendment of chapter number 1. Nothing to explain, just the turn back strategy has now been deleted. Okay, all right. Now next is basically, again, in chapter number 1, we are still in the concept of risk. Okay, so there is a change in risk management strategies. Now under types of risk, okay, we have 3 different types of risk. One is business risk, then technology risk, and then data related risk. Under business risk, there is no change. Okay, under technology risk, again, there is no change. But under data related risk, earlier in the previous versions of the module, it was only written that this particular topic has been dealt with in the later chapters. Okay, and now what they have done is they have shifted the content which was there in earlier in chapter number 3. There was a content in the name of logical excess exposures. Now they have shifted the entire content. Okay, here, data related risk. So as such, no amendment guys. This is not an amendment. This is, again, just I told you, institute will keep on making efforts to improve the content, improvise the content. Okay, so this is mere shifting of content from chapter number 3 to chapter number 1. Okay, so if you see, all these concepts are already there. We have already discussed it in our regular lectures: data diddling, bombs, Trojan horse, then worms, then we have rounding down, salami techniques, asynchronous attacks. So all this is already covered. Don't worry. Okay, but yeah, this is nothing new. It is only, I have written it very clearly here. This is only case of content shift from chapter number 3, logical excess exposures. It has now been shifted to data related risk. Okay, all right. So with this, already our chapter number 1 amendment, so-called amendments, is over. Okay, chapter 2 guys, we don't have any such changes. Chapter 3, yes, now I'm just giving you an overview of chapter 3, 4 and 5, and then I'll tell you as to what all things I'm going to discuss. Okay, now chapter 3, under chapter number 3, first thing, under managerial controls, we have system development controls. Okay, here the content has been changed totally. Okay, so I'm going to discuss this in detail. Content has been changed. Okay, overall concept has not changed, because all these points that is here, I already in my old lectures also I discussed the concept of SDLC. So as such, the concept has not changed much, but yes, the content has changed. Okay, so we are going to discuss this. Okay, I'll take it up now. Next, if you see data resource management control, again there is a change in content, so I am going to discuss this in this amendment lecture only. You are going to get it. Okay, now again, chapter number 3, boundary controls. Under application controls, we have boundary controls. Okay, there is no change, guys. I mean, the concept is also same, and there is only slight up and down in the content. Okay, so this is same. I mean, you just go through the updated notes. Earlier access control point was written here. Okay, they have now just made it as a point. So as such, there is no change in the concept, so you will be able to do it yourself. I mean, we have already discussed boundary controls in our lectures. Okay, then again, communication control, again slight change in the content, so as such not required. These are minute changes only, guys. Okay, database controls, again database controls, some addition in the content, and there is change from the previous edition. So I am going to discuss this. I am going to discuss database controls in detail. I am going to discuss output controls, because the content has changed in entirety. Okay, so we are going to discuss this in our amendment lectures. Okay, all right. So this is amendment with respect to chapter number 3. Okay, now they have added a new content, which is, again, you just have to go through it. Very simple, read only. I mean, you just go through it. It is, if you read it, you will be able to understand. If you remember, guys, when we were, let's say, when we do the application controls, when we understand the boundary controls, we have the audit trail controls. When we were doing the logical access control, physical access control, we covered the role of auditor, right? So now institute has basically, with respect to auditing part, they have incorporated a new content: auditing boundary controls, auditing input controls, auditing processing controls, communication controls, etc. So this is going to be very, very easy for you. But I have been telling you in my classes, in my lectures, that if the concept of the controls is clear, then only you will be able to write well under the role of auditors or auditing aspect of that particular control. So make sure the concept with respect to all the application controls, boundary controls, input controls, communication controls, processing controls, database controls, and output controls is clear. Okay, and then just go through it. Okay, all right. Then in chapter number 4, we are going to learn about e-rupee, a new digital payment method that has been added. Okay, so we are going to learn about it here in this particular amendment class. And we have a major amendment, a new content, a new topic, which is on blockchain technology. Okay, for blockchain, guys, I am going to take a separate session. So for blockchain, the amendment, the new content addition, you will get it in a different video. The link will be posted here in the description. Okay, this I am going to take it up separately, because this is kind of, you can call it as an addition to a new concept. This is something new. Okay, and then in the 5th chapter, guys, we have only one amendment again, which is again in the concept of key technology components. They have added few points, which you can see in red here. They have added few points with respect to network security configuration under the head of cyber security. Okay, they have added few points, so we are going to discuss this. Rest, there are no changes as such. The overall concept remains the same. Whatever you have covered, have faith in yourself. Keep your concept super clear, and you will be able to do well. Okay, so let us get the discussion started, guys. But again, blockchain technology, the new content which is added in chapter number 4, it will be covered in a separate video. Okay. Alright, guys, so the next topic that we need to cover under managerial controls is system development controls. Okay, now before we start reading the contents of this particular topic, let me just give you an idea about system development. Okay, any organization, if they wish to get new systems developed, okay, they would not follow any random process to get software developed. Rather, they follow something which we call as software, or let's say system development life cycle. We call it as system development life cycle. So if an organization wants to get new software developed, they have to follow something which we call it as software development life cycle, or let's say system development life cycle. Okay, now what is this life cycle all about? So let us just understand the process in a very brief manner. Let us just understand the cycle in a very brief manner, so that you have an idea as to how the entire software development work takes place in an organization. Okay, and having understood this, we are going to dive into the content. Okay, So what is software development lifecycle all about? So let me just write few of the steps, I mean the sequential steps that needs to be followed in case an organization wants a new systems, okay, to be developed. So first thing that an organization will have to do is they need to do something which we call it as, let's say, preliminary investigation. So what is it about? I'll just tell you. Let me just finish writing all the stages first. So first stage is basically preliminary investigation. Then second stage will be something called as system requirement analysis. System requirement analysis. Okay. Third is, once the requirement is gathered, the third stage is basically system design. Okay. After design comes the system development part, or let's say we can also call it as coding. Okay. Once coding is done, the software, the systems is tested. So we have the testing phase. After testing is done, the systems are implemented. So we have implementation stage also. And then finally we have something called as post implementation review, and also the maintenance of the software or the systems. Okay, so these are just 7 steps which I have written. Okay, I have not explained any aspect to you yet, but yes, these are the 7 steps of a soft system development life cycle. Okay, so number 1, let me just give you a brief idea about it. Okay, so number 1 is preliminary investigation. Now let's say a company is facing certain issues, okay, in their existing software, or they find a new opportunity in the market and they want to grab it. So they want to get a new software made for it. Okay, so preliminary investigation basically means that if I am the developer, okay, you are the organization, I am the developer, you have hired me to take care, you know, of your development aspect of your new software. So first thing that I would do is I would do a preliminary investigation. In preliminary investigation, I would try to know about your organization. I would try to know what kind of software you are looking for. I would try to understand if you have any existing softwares, what difficulty you are facing in your existing software, what kind of upgradation do you want. So all this study I am going to do under preliminary investigation. Okay, so having understood this, what the next thing has to be done is I am now going to, once I have the clarity, okay, that's, yes, this is what this particular organization want, you are the organization, this is what you guys want. Okay, once I have this clarity, now the development team, okay, they will now sit down and jot down all the requirements with respect to the new software. Okay, so if you are the company, if you are the management, let's say, so the requirement analysis team, they are going to ask you for the requirements as to what are your choices, what are the features that you want to have in the software, what colors and themes do you wish to have, all these things. Okay, so that next thing is requirement analysis. Once the entire requirement is jotted down, the requirement the requirement sheet, basically the documentation where all the requirements is basically jotted down, it will be handed over to the design team now. Okay, these are all this will be done by the development team. If I am the developer, it will be done by the developer, but this developer, I'll be having a separate designer, I'll be having a person who codes the software, etc. Right? So once the requirement is gathered, once the requirement is jotted down, I'll hand it over to the designer. The designer is now going to make a blueprint of the entire software. When I say blueprint, it simply means as to how many parts will the software have, how many modules or components will the software have. Okay, so imagine it in this way. If I talk in very layman's terms, imagine it in this way, that if there is a vacant land and I'm a builder, obviously if I see the vacant land, I'm not just going to start randomly the development of in infrastructure here. Okay, I'll not just ask the laborers to come and start developing a building, right? Or let's say I'll not start without any planning, right? Of course. So what will I do as a builder now? Probably I'll hire an architect, I'll get the site measured, and then I'll properly design the building first as to how many floors will be there, and from where will the staircase be, what about the fire exit, all these things I'll have to work upon. And then only once the design and all is clear, the labors and all, I can get the materials, and then the work of development, the erectioning of the building can start, right? Similarly in software also, if I know the requirements of my client, I cannot just start doing the coding part. I need to first be very clear as to how many parts the software will be having. So I need to design maybe in the form of flow charts, okay, that okay, this is one component of the software. From this component the information is going to flow into the another component, all these things. So I need to do the designing. On the basis of this design, the developers, the coders are going to code the software. Okay, so please understand what all points did I tell you. First is preliminary investigation, then the requirement analysis is done. Okay, then we have a system designer who designs the system on the basis of the requirements. Then on the basis of the design made, the developer, he is going to basically develop the software, or let's say code the software, right? Only after coding is done, the software will somehow come into existence, right? So let's say the coding is over, but then I have done the coding, I just cannot hand over the software to you right now. I need to first test whether the software is working as intended or not, right? So we have a phase on software testing, system testing, right? Now once the testing is done, once I am satisfied with the results and all, once you are satisfied with the results of the software, perhaps we are going to think of implementing the same. Implementing means installing the new software in your existing systems, basically, right? So we have a phase on implementation as well. All right, now as a developer, my work doesn't get over once the implementation of the software takes place, because after implementation also, because it is a new software for all of you, you might have some difficulties. Okay, so as a developer, I need to give you that support also. I have to be there in your post implementation aspect also. I mean, I need to check whether the purpose, the objective of the software is being achieved or not. What you actually desired, is it happening or not? Okay, so are we able to achieve the intended results or not? All these aspects I need to check. Okay, and also we have the maintenance part. Now let's say I made an accounting software for you, okay, or let's say it was a billing related software, right? But then again there is a change in rates of GST, so accordingly I need to again update and maintain the software, right? So the developer's work doesn't end only after the implementation or installation of the software, but yes, he needs to do a post implementation review. He needs to be there for the maintenance of the software also. All right, so this is, guys, a brief idea that I just gave you regarding the system development life cycle. Okay, this is basically, there are so many stages, and generally each stage is done by different members of the development team. Okay, so the ones who, let's say, gather the requirements, okay, we call them as analyst. The ones who gather the requirements of the software, we call them as analyst. Okay, and then ones who designs it, we call them as designer. So analyst will prepare the list of the requirements, and the list they are going to hand it over to the design team, the designers, and they are going to now design the software. Design means, when I say design, it is not like coming up with the software, but it is more of a, let's say, blueprint of the software. It is a blueprint, it is just a drawing, it is just a diagram. Now for example, if you happen to make a building, your own house, first you get a drawing from an architect, right? So this drawing, getting of the drawing is nothing but the design part. On the basis of this drawing, the coders, the developers are going to do the coding. Okay, so who is the one responsible for coding? It is the developers, software developers. Then we can have someone who does the testing, we call them as testers. Then we have someone who implements the software, and then ones who take care of the maintenance, right? Now what I wish to tell you here is, please understand, at each of this phase, the 7 phases that I have mentioned, at each of this phase, a documentation will be prepared. Okay, so for example, analyst, he will gather all the requirements, he'll prepare a document which will be used by the designers to do the designing. Similarly, the designers are going to come up with their own documentation, which basically once they are done with the designing part, making of all the flowcharts, diagrams, the components of the system, they are going to hand over the document to the developers. The developers, on the basis of the design, they are going to basically code the software. That means the software will now come into existence, right? So please understand here, I just taught you the process of system development life cycle. Okay, now few things that I wish all of you to understand is, in any organization, it is the management who takes into consideration, who basically gets the software development done, etc. Okay, of course they will hire a team. If they don't have an in-house team, they will get a software development team, they'll give the work to them. Okay, but yes, of course it is the work of the responsibility of the management to see whether everything is proper or not, right? And when I talk about software development life cycle, I mean software, let's discuss about the system development controls now. So what is system development controls? Now perhaps when you know system development life cycle, SDLC, it is going to be very easy for you to understand. Okay, so it says, first point says system development management. System development management, they have the responsibility for functions concerned with analyzing, designing, building, implement and maintaining the information systems. These are nothing but the phases of the development that I just told you about. Analyzing, let's say analyzing the present situation, analyzing the existing systems, then accordingly designing the new systems, then building is nothing but developing or coding of the new systems, then implementing, it is the installation part, and then maintaining the information systems. Okay, so what is system development controls? The important part that you have to now understand is, system development controls are targeted to ensure that proper documentations and authorizations are available for each phase of the system development process. So this is the main thing that you have to understand, guys. System development controls are basically controls that are targeted to ensure that after each phase of the software development process, which I have just discussed with you, after each phase of the system development, are there proper documentations or not? Are there proper authorizations or not? Now what do you mean by authorization? For example, let's say this analyst here, system requirement analyst, he is going to prepare a document which will contain all the requirements of the clients. Okay, we can call it as we can call it as system requirement specifications. We can have different functional requirement specification document. We can call it by different names. Okay, and after all the requirements are written, he is of course going to sign the document also, that yes, these are the requirements. And in fact, in system requirement, if this is my SRS, system requirement specification document, wherein all the requirements are written, so the analyst is also going to sign it, and at the same time we are also going to give it to the client, to the company, that this is the requirements that we have observed, that we have noted, you also accept it and sign it. So they are also going to, the client is also going to sign the document and give it back to us, right? So please understand this, that system development controls, the controls that we are just going to about to start, it is targeted to ensure that proper documentation and authorizations are available for each phase of the system development process. Okay, and it includes controls for new system development activities. Okay, so what are the activities now? I have told you in brief, but let us now understand them in detail. Okay, so let's understand. It says it can be a good question can be framed from this part. So it says the activities discussed below deal with system development control. So we are going to learn about activities. Please be very careful, they might ask you this in the exam, what are the various activities? Okay, yeah, with respect to system development, activities with respect to system development. Okay, so let's understand. Number one is problem definition and feasibility assessment. Problem definition and feasibility assessment. Now this is nothing, guys, if you compare it with the terms that I used, this is nothing but this is preliminary investigation. Preliminary investigation. Okay, now they have put in more specific headings. So they have mentioned problem definition and feasibility assessment. Okay, now let's understand this. Number one activity of system development controls that we are covering is problem definition and feasibility assessment. Okay, now let's say you are my client. Okay, and you wish to automate your sales process. Okay, because you are, for handling it manually, it is taking a lot of time and you need to have a lot of manpower also. So you want to automate it. So as a developer, you call me. All right. So first thing that I would want to understand is what problem are you facing? So of course you will tell me that our volume of sales is going up, we need to automate it. So I need to understand your problem. Okay. and accordingly, and of course I will, having understood your problem, probably I'll design, I'll basically give you an option, give you solutions. Okay, I might come up with 3-4 solutions that you might go for this, or we may, you know, build an entire software for you with all the hardwares and all, which will ensure automation. I might come up with 3-4 solutions, right? But then of course each solution will give you different benefits, each solution's cost will be different. So we will have to do a feasibility study also. We'll have to do a feasibility study to assess which option, which solution will be best for the organization, keeping in view the cost benefit in mind, right? So there are 2 words here, very simple: problem definition and feasibility assessment. Okay, now what is problem definition? You as a developer, I'll try to understand the problem, I'll try to understand your needs. Okay, now please let me talk very practically. If you are the person who wants a software, if you want to get a new system made, the underlying reason can be only 2 things. Either you are facing problem with your existing infrastructure or systems, or there is an opportunity in the market which you want to grab, and hence you want to develop the new systems. Now for example, let's say because of COVID and all, okay, many organizations they shifted everything to online infrastructure and all. So they saw that, okay, because of lockdowns and all, the stores remained closed for so many number of days and also they thought that this is a good time. I mean, now people are you know, they have this habit, they have been using the mobile phones, smartphones, with Jio coming and also data becoming very cheap. So they saw this as an opportunity that yes, this is, let's say, the right time to shift online, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is, any company, they would want to make a new software either if they are facing any difficulty or they find an opportunity in the environment, right? So let's understand the point here. It says information systems are developed either to resolve any problems or take advantage of opportunities, right? So the first step in an application development is to define the problem or opportunity. So when I say problem definition, it is not just the problem, it can be an opportunity also. Okay, so this is a first step, right? And it says the first step in an application development is to define the problem or opportunity, identify clearly and precisely, which is done only after several rounds of discussion with the user group. You are the user group, you are the ones who are going to use the software, so you are the user group, I am the developer. So we are going to do several rounds of discussion and then probably I'll come up with a solution. I'll tell you few options. Now what happens after possible solution options are identified? See, I'll give you probably 3 options, 1, 2 and 3, but then it is now on us to decide as to which particular option are we going ahead with. And of course, while deciding upon a solution, you are going to do a cost benefit analysis. Okay, now if you are a very cash rich organization, maybe you might go for solution number 3, which requires a lot of investment. If you are not a very cost rich cash rich organization, perhaps you might go for option number 1. So either of 3 options are good, but we have to determine the feasibility, right? So after possible solution options are identified, project feasibility, that means the likelihood of these systems will be useful for the organization is determined. So what is feasibility assessment? I am just underlining it, highlighting it for you. Feasibility assessment refers to a process of evaluating alternative systems through cost benefit analysis so that the most feasible and the desirable systems can be selected for development. So done. Phase number 1, point number 1, activity number 1 with respect to system development is done, wherein you learned about 2 points, problem definition and feasibility assessment. Remember, when I say problem definition, it can be either actual problem or it can be an available opportunity also. Okay, and feasibility assessment is basically evaluating, remember the word, evaluating alternative systems through cost benefit analysis. You do in capital budgeting, you do this, no, that we have been given 3 options, which is the most best one for the company. So you calculate all the IRR, NPV, etc., right? So this is what we have to do here, feasibility assessment. Done. Okay, now next stage, see, analysis of the existing system. Again, point number 2 also is a part of preliminary investigation only. Okay, so I being a developer, see, I would try to understand your existing systems too. What if there is no need to come up with a new software altogether? Rather, if you have existing systems, some changes, some updates in the existing system will also be, helpful to you, right? So as a developer, I need to check your existing systems also. All right, I need to understand, let's say I need to analyze the existing system. Why? Number one, because it might so happen that if I do certain modifications in the existing system, your work will be solved. Okay, or let's say if your existing system is way too bad, let's say, but then at least I need to analyze it to understand what went wrong, what are the weaknesses in the existing system, what are the disadvantages of the existing system, and having understood the disadvantages, weaknesses, I won't repeat it in the new system, right? So analysis of the existing system is also very important, right? So it says designers, or let's say that they have mentioned the word designers, but the appropriate word is analyst here. Okay, the ones who do the feasibility assessment, the requirement analysis part, we call them as analysts. Okay, so designers anyways need to analyze the existing system. That involves two major tasks. So they are going to understand the organization, they are going to understand the organization history, structure, culture, etc. They are going to understand what are the systems that they are using, how they are linked, how they are coupled. Okay, and also they are going to understand the people of the organization, whether the organization's employees, the people, are they willing to accept change, is there any kind of resistance from them, right? Because as a developer, guys, let me be very honest and tell you this, that in ERPs or chapter also you must have covered this, that any new thing which the organization wishes to implement, there will always be huge resistance from the employees, right? So as a developer, I also need to check whether there is willingness of the stakeholders to change. Okay, so I need to understand the existing system. When I say existing system, I need to understand the organization, its structure, its culture, how the systems are coupled, the willingness of the stakeholders to change. I need to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the existing system, and accordingly I am going to determine the requirements of the new system, or let's say the extent of change that is required. So why do we need to understand the existing system, guys? If I summarize, why do the analyst needs to understand the existing systems? So number one, two reasons: either what changes can be made to the existing system, changes, or let's say updates, or let's say if the existing system is way too old, there's no scope of updation and upgradations, then I would now try and come up with new system requirements. Okay, so these are the two possible reasons as to why existing system is analyzed. Either I'll update or make changes in the existing system, so for that I need to analyze the existing systems, or if let's say the changes and updates are not at all possible, feasible, let's say, then of course I'll come up with the new system requirements after having understood the weaknesses and the drawbacks of the existing system, right? So this is second step, analysis of the existing system. Okay, now if I go with the process, the system development life cycle that I discussed, these 2 points that we have just covered, it should be a part of what? It should be a part of preliminary investigation stage. Okay, now next is basically system requirement analysis. Okay, so I told you that once the existing systems are studied and all, the requirement for the new system is basically done. Okay, so again, analyzing the existing system, this part will also be a part of system requirement analysis. System requirement. Okay, so if I go with this particular life cycle, second stage, as you all can see, is system requirement analysis, right? So if we understand the problems, if we understand the existing systems, perhaps we can come up with the requirements of the new system. So it is written here very clearly, you need to understand the strengths and weaknesses of existing system to determine the new requirements, the new system requirements. Okay, done. Now let's say once the system requirements analysis is also done, once the we have the requirement document with us, that okay, these are the things that is required, the analyst is now going to hand over the requirement sheet to the system design. Okay, so designer is now going to basically make the design of the software. Now let me be very clear again, when I say he is going to design the software, it doesn't mean that the software is going to come into existence, but he is going to design the software, he is going to create a blueprint, a structure of the software. Okay, like a diagram, basically. One, before a building is built, of course a diagram is made, right? So likewise, as a designer is going to make diagrams for the software. He is going to use flow charts, data flow diagrams, etc., and he is going to come up with the design of the software as to how many modules will be there in the software, how one module will interact with other, how will the data flow from one module to the other. All these things he is going to design. Okay, so the next stage, next activity of the system development life cycle is basically information processing system design. Okay, so let us understand here. Okay, again it says this phase involves following requirements: elicitation of the detailed requirements. Again, see, so there is some overlapping. Elicitation of detailed requirements. Again, this is a phase, this is a part of which phase? System requirement analysis. Okay, so there are some overlapping, but yes, this system development life cycle, it is quite standard, which I have just given you to have an overall understanding. Okay, so again, elicitation of detailed requirements. Now please understand, I am the developer, you are the user group, you are the one for whom I am making the software. So who is the person who is going to tell me the requirements? Of course you are the one who is going to use the software, so you are going to tell me the requirements, your needs, that these are the features that you want in the software, this is the color that I want in the software, right? So either ask the stakeholders for the requirement, you are the stakeholder, in case they are aware about it, or discover the requirement through analysis and experimentation, in case stakeholders are not very certain about the requirements. Okay, so in case you are not very certain, then I might give you a few options, and probably I'll try to elicit the requirements through some analysis and through some experimentation. Okay, so once the detailed requirement is gathered, now the actual design part shall begin. Once the requirement is gathered, then the design part shall begin. So it says design of data or information flow. How many modules will be there in the software? From which module, how the data is going to flow? So the designer is now going to make use of tools such as DFD and etc. for this. Okay, so it says the designer shall determine the flow of data or information and transformation points, the frequency and timing of data, the frequency and timing of the data and information flows, and the extent to which data and information flows will be formalized. So he may use DFD for this purpose. Data flow diagrams, you already know this, we covered it in chapter number 1 as well. Okay, now having designed the data flow, information flow, he is now going to design the database. Okay, so designing of database and user interface. Now you all know this. Let me just give you an example that when I talk about database, let's say the project that I have got here in this particular topic that I am discussing. You are my client and you have given me a project of e-commerce. You want to automate the entire sales process. You want to convert your physical store into an online store also, right? So this is a project, right? So you deal into 1000 products, let's say. So of course I need to design the database also, right? No, I'm not saying that I need to put in the details of the products right now, but of course I need to design a database as to the database will have your product name, color, size, the different sizes, let's say the quality, and it may have some pictures also of the product, etc. So this is just a designing part. This is just creating an infrastructure. I am not asking you to put the data at the moment, but yes, I am going to design the database. Okay, and at the same time I need to finalize on the user interface also. Now what is user interface? Let's say your customer wishes to buy something online. So how will he see the screen and all? How interactive will the screen be? Will it be easy for him to find the products, etc.? So this is user interface. Now for example, when you log into Amazon, you are looking for a black pen, you just type in black pen and so many products comes in, right? So this is a very simplified user interface, right? So I would also want to have such kind of, let's say, user interface. So we need to finalize about the database as well as user interface. Okay, so after coming up with understanding the design of data and information flow. The next is the design of database and the user interface. So the design of database involves determining its scope, structure, whereas the design of user interface determines the ways in which users are going to interact with the system. Okay, the user may be you, it may be your customer also in my example. Okay, then next comes the physical design. Now when I talk about physical design, guys, don't think it of as a as something which is tangible. When I say physical design, it simply means as to how many components will be there in my software, how many modules will be there in my software. Okay, we have already understood the flow, we have already understood how the information will flow, we have already discussed about the how will the database be, how will the user interface be. Now let's understand how the software will be, how many components will be there in the software. So this involves breaking up the logical design into units which can be further decomposed, which can be further divided into implementation units such as programs and modules. So for example, if this is a software, how many modules will the software have, how many subparts, how many subcomponents or subsystems the module is going to have. This is what is decided in this particular stage, which we call it as physical design. Don't get confused with something tangible, but yes, physical design simply means that you are converting your logical designs into something which can be further divided and used in implementation, such as how many modules, programs do we need to have, how many, I can also use the word, how many subsystems will be there in the entire software. Okay, now please understand this, guys, that any big software, let's say you are my client and you want to get an ERP implemented. So ERP, it will be a massive software. All right, so I need to break down the ERP into various modules as you have studied. So let's say we have the finance and accounting module, we have the controlling module. Maybe I'll prepare the finance and accounting module first for you and then we'll implement it. Okay, and you may start using the finance and accounting module, and perhaps gradually I'm going to come up with more modules and implement it, and finally once all the modules are made, the entire integration between modules will take place, right? So please understand, when I say physical design, it simply means converting the logical designs or let's say into units which can be further decomposed or which can be used in implementation, such as programs and modules. Okay, and of course, guys, it might so happen, let's say that the project is really very big. Okay, let's say ERP only. So for this, I am the one who is, let's say, making the software for you. I'm the one who is making a customized software for you, but then we also need to have the required OS, we also need to have the required hardware to basically run such kind of massive software. So I also need to check upon, maybe we might also have to design on the hardware and the software platform if you don't have any. So in case the hardware and software platforms are not available in the organization, the new platforms are required to be designed to support the proposed system. So new OS or maybe new powerful hardwares might be required to support this particular new software of yours. Okay, so this is all about the design part. What are the points that we have covered, guys? We are studying the activities, we are covering the activities in system development controls, right? So number one activity that we covered is problem definition and feasibility assessment. Second, I would try and gain an understanding of your existing systems, your existing infrastructure, your existing hierarchy, organizational structure, the people, the management, everything, right? And then I'll start with the designing part. I'll start with the designing part only when I have the detailed requirement analysis. I have done the detailed requirement analysis. I have the entire details with me. Then the designer is going to, based on the requirements gathered, he is going to design the systems. When I say design the systems, there are 4 aspects that needs to be understood. Okay, so we are going to discuss about the flow of the data. We are going to discuss about the various parts, modules. We are going to discuss about the database, the user interface, and then of course if there is any need for extra hardware or software. All right, now sometimes, again, please understand this, the next step is basically once the design part is ready, once the designer he makes all the diagrams, flowcharts, etc., then the developer is going to code the software. So in this part we have got 2 points, guys. Okay, it says hardware software acquisition, or let's say, and procedures development, and this procedures development is nothing but coding. So please understand, sometimes what happens is, once we are done with the requirements, understanding and all, it can be, as I told you, it might be possible that the organization that you don't have the required hardware and all, right? So first thing is that the hardware will be procured, okay, and then the developer is going to start coding and do all the development work, right? So it says hardware software acquisition, and when I say software, primarily let's say it can be the operating software also, right? It might maybe the solution that they have proposed, the software that they have proposed, let's say it is a Linux based, so they might have to get a hardware with a Linux operating system, right? So hardware and software acquisition is done, and then the coding part will be done, okay? So it says to purchase a new application system or hardware, a request for proposal must be prepared, vendor proposals are sought, and final decisions is made on evaluation. So again, if you are the organization, if you are buying any hardware from outside or any ready-made software, just don't buy it randomly. There has to be a proper process for the same. You need to float tenders, you need to invite quotations from multiple vendors, okay? You need to assess which vendor is going to be the best, and accordingly you need to select the vendor. So this is what is written here, okay? It says to purchase new application system or hardware, a request for the proposal must be prepared. A request for the proposal, that means a tender or invitation to tender has to be there. Then we are going to ask the vendors, the interested parties, to reply to those, to respond to those tenders. So vendors proposals are sought, and then we are going to evaluate their responses, and then we are going to place the order, and final decisions is made on the basis of the responses to the tenders which are made by various vendors, okay? Now again, the second part is during procedure development, this is about coding, okay? So designers specify the activities that users must undertake to support the ongoing operation of the system and to obtain useful output. So I told you, how are the coders going to code? So they are going to code on the basis of the design, the blueprint, the structure which the designers have forwarded, right, have given. So the developers are going to code the software on the basis of the system design documents which the designers must have prepared, okay? Now after the software is designed, okay, we now will do software testing and conversion is basically implementation. Converting is simply means now you are not going to use the old software, from now you are going to use the new software, right? Conversion from old to new. So this is nothing but implementation, right? So acceptance testing and conversion. What is acceptance testing? Please understand. Now once the coder makes all the software, once the coding is done, of course I am not going to directly install the software in your systems. Of course, we'll have to do a lot of testing, right? If the software is working correctly or not, if it is working, as per our expectations or not. So we'll do a lot of testing, and once we are satisfied with the test results, then only the software will be implemented in your systems, okay? So it is called as acceptance testing. I am going to talk about testing in the subsequent phase also in programming management controls. If you can see, we have testing here also. Then I'm going to teach you the different testings, but for the timing, just understand, nobody, you are my client, let's say I'm the developer, you are not going to accept the software until unless you test it, you are satisfied with it, right? So we call it as acceptance testing. So acceptance testing is carried out to identify errors or deficiencies in the system prior to its final release into production use. Prior to its final release into production use means prior to implementing it in the live systems. Henceforth, whenever you come across this word, let's say production or system, or don't get confused. This has nothing to do with manufacturing, production. No, this simply means, in IT terminology, it simply means the live systems, the existing systems that you are using, okay? So please understand this. It says acceptance testing is carried out to identify errors or deficiencies in the system prior to its final release into production use. That simply means prior to its implementation for live use, for the usage, okay? The conversion phase, conversion simply means converting from old systems to the new systems, okay, comprises the activities undertaken to place the new systems in operations. Now please understand, it is very simple. You must have faced it in the you will face it in the office also, like once you join the article shift. Now let's say Tally, all of you know, right? We have got different versions of Tally. Now if I am using Tally 9.1 ERP and my client is still using Tally 7.2, and if he sends me a file, probably we'll have to convert that file into Tally 9 version first, and then only I'll be able to open the file, right? Similarly, if you are migrating from old system to the new systems, you have to convert all your old files into the new format, and then only you will be able to use it, right? So when the new systems are implemented, when there is a conversion from old system to new system, there are a lot of other formalities that needs to be done. One example which I gave you is like converting the old files to the new format, right? Okay, so having done this, let's say you were happy with the software's result, so we implemented it. Okay, now my work is not yet over, guys. I am the developer, my work is not yet over. Okay, so I have to look into the operation and maintenance part also. I told you, see what happens is I told you about post implementation review, I told you about maintenance. Okay, now let me just be very clear. What happens is, let's say okay, these are the issues here, and this is time. Okay, now at this point of time, 0 point of time, your software is installed, new software. So at this point of time, perhaps you are not going to have much difficulties, etc. But then gradually, as and when you use the software initially, you might face different issues. Okay, and then what happens is, once you reach a peak of issues and all, the development team is going to do a post implementation review. Okay, and then they are going to understand, okay, these are the new issues that you are facing and all, and they are going to basically address all your concerns, and then gradually your issues is going to go down. This is nothing but we call it as troubleshooting. So whatever problems that you come up with, they are going to troubleshoot. Okay, so this is something which again needs to be done by the development team members. They are going to, when I talk about post implementation review, they check whether the software, they check whether the software is working as intended or not, whether you are getting any benefits out of the new software or not. All these things are checked upon in this part. Okay, and then let's say if there is an update, if Modi ji comes up and then tells that this is a new rate of GST from tomorrow, then again a lot of maintenance work also needs to be done in the software, right? So it says in the system, so operation and maintenance, there are 2 points here. Let us understand the points. It says in this phase, the new system is run as production system. This means the live systems. Okay, because we have implemented it, we have now converted from old system to the new system, so now the new systems is running, right? So in this phase, the new system is run as production system and periodically modified to better meet its objective. So there is always update, yes or no, in any software that you have in your mobile phones, in any of the apps, WhatsApp, Instagram, there are always updates, right? So the updates are basically to make the software more I can say better. Okay, so it says and periodically they are modified to meet its objectives. A formal process is required to identify and record the need for changes to a system and to authorize and control implementation of the needed change. So please understand, guys, if there is any requirement to make any change in the software, again the changes also will not be done in a haphazard manner. Again, for changes also we need to follow a process. Okay, so for changes also we need to first understand whether there is a need for change. Okay, then we need to authorize, we need to get it approved. Okay, if I am the developer, of course I just cannot go randomly and change the software, right? We need to assess whether there is a need for change. There needs to be an approval from your end. Okay, so approval will be there. Again, before implementing any change in the live systems, the changes needs to be tested. Changes also needs to be tested, right? All these things you all know, right? So this is what as a developer I need to ensure. Okay, all right, so these were the activities, guys, and this particular topic, it has been amended. Okay, so the concept as such has not changed, but yes, the institute now has come up with better points. Earlier also I used to teach with this basic idea. You have to keep this basic steps in mind, and accordingly the different activities have been designed. Okay, so what is the first activity? Problem definition and feasibility assessment. Second is analysis of the existing system. Third is the design part. On the basis of this design, the hardware and the software is procured and the development work starts. After the development is done, the program will be tested. Once the testing results is acceptable, it is going to be implemented. That means the conversion, okay, it means conversion. And after conversion, after implementation, operation and maintenance also needs to be taken care of by the developer, right? So these are the activities, right? Okay, now let us understand the role of the auditor. As such, in this part there is no change, but yes, it's quite simple. Let us understand it. Okay, now role of auditor, when I say it says three different types of audits may be conducted during the system development process. Now this is totally different from all the role of auditors that we have studied and we are going to study. Okay, this particular role of auditor, under system development controls, we have to learn about three different types of audits. Okay, now when a new system is being developed, there can be three different types of audits. This is what we have to study. Okay, now let's say I am a software developer. I have a team of 10 persons. Okay, and you are my client. I am making a software for you. So as and when, for each phase of the software development life cycle that I am following, let's say we do a preliminary investigation, we do a requirement analysis. As and when a step is followed, is executed, a person from my team, he is going to check whether the requirements was properly gathered or not. As and when the design is done, another person from my team will check whether the design is perfect or not. So what is happening, please understand, as and when we are moving ahead towards the development of the software, then and there the steps are being checked. So this is called as concurrent audit. It says auditors are members of the software development team. He will be a person from my team only, and they are going to assist in they assist the team in improving the quality of system development for specific type they are building and implementing. So as and when the steps takes place in the system development life cycle, somebody from my team only, they are going to check it whether it is done properly or not. Okay, now to make things more clear, let's say I have got 10 persons team. Okay, let me just draw 5 for the time being, and this was the person who did the requirement analysis, and he is the designer, let's say. Okay, so as and when the requirement analysis is done, this person is not involved in the development. Okay, but he is going to check whether the requirement gathering was proper or not. Once the design is done, probably he is going to check whether the design is okay or not. So he is acting as a auditor here. Okay, but he is not an external auditor. He is someone from my team only. So please understand, concurrent audit and post implementation audit that I am just going to teach you are done generally by the members from the development team itself. Okay, so what is post implementation audit? The name is quite suggestive. I just gave you an idea also. Post implementation review. Post implementation audit is similar. It simply means auditors seek to help an organization learn from its experience in the development of a specific application system. So we do it to help the organization if they are facing any issues or not. Now please understand, in post implementation audit, the main objective of doing a post implementation audit is to basically check, they might be evaluating whether the system needs to be scrapped, continued or modified in some way. Let's say we made a software. Okay, now we are doing a post implementation review. If we see that the software is serving no benefits to you, it is of no use to you, of course we will plan to scrap it out. Okay, now let's say if it is working as intended, you are very happy with it, your problems are being taken care of, so we are going to continue with it. Okay, but let's say there are certain difficulties which you are facing, which can be tweaked, which needs to be checked, which can be corrected. So we are going to modify the systems. We are going to make certain changes in the software. So why is post implementation audit done? Please understand, this audit is done to check whether your problems are actually solved with the new software or not, whether you are deriving any benefits out of the new software or not. If you are not deriving any benefits, if this software is still useless to you, scrap it. We will plan to scrap it out. Okay, if it is useful to you, we are going to continue with it. If let's say some more additions needs to be done, some more slight changes needs to be made in order for the software to make it more beneficial, we are going to go for some modifications. Okay, and then we have a general audit. General audit is not related to any particular phase or doing it before implementation, after implementation. It is overall controls over the entire software development life cycle. Okay, so auditors evaluate system development control overall, how the system development took place. This is how in entirety it is checked upon. Okay, now generally what happens, this general audit is now done by someone who is not from the development team. Okay, someone who is who doesn't belong to the development team, right? So an external auditor is more likely to undertake the general audits rather than concurrent or post implementation audit of the system development process. So please understand, the general audit is primarily is gonna be done by an external auditor, and concurrent audit and post implementation audit are done by members of development team itself. Okay, so in short, they are the internal auditors, right? So guys, with this the topic of system development controls is over. All you have to remember is the how many activities with respect to system development control. So I covered 6 activities here, so please remember the 6 activities. It is very, very simple. And then we also, under the role of auditors part, we covered the different types of audit. Okay, done. We are starting with data resource management control. Now, organizations actually they realize, you all know that data is a critical resource for an organization, but only by realizing it, obviously at the same time you need to implement adequate controls for it. Okay, so as an auditor we are going to check whether now organizations whether they have proper controls on data or not. So many organizations now realize that data is critical resource and must be managed properly, and therefore accordingly centralized planning and control are implemented. Centralized planning and control has to be there. Okay, now this point they have mentioned control activities involved in maintaining the integrity of database. What controls can we have in place to maintain the integrity of data? Integrity, you understand, no? Okay. So we are just discussing few controls with respect to data. Okay. Now, can you name few controls? What is the first thing that should come into your mind when we talk about data controls? Controls over data. Yes, access controls, that you would not want any unauthorized person to access our controls. And then, can we have backup? Should we have backup of our data or not? Okay. So, because we have told access control first, let's understand first control, access control we have. Okay. Now, see, do you understand encryption? Okay. And did I tell you somewhere that, let's say if you want to protect your data, if you have your data here, if you want to protect your data, either we can have access controls, that means user ID and password, or else we can encrypt the data that is inside the cylinder. So what is going to happen if we encrypt it? Only authorized persons who have the corresponding decryption key will be able to read or write or whatever rights they have. Are you able to understand? So in access controls, we are going to learn about 2 controls. Access controls are designed to prevent unauthorized individuals from viewing, retrieving, computing or destroying the entity's data. And controls are established in the following manner. Either we can have user access controls through passwords, tokens, or we can also go for biometric. Okay, you remember token word? Who creates the access token? Once you log into an operating system, if your login is successful, an access token is generated. What is there in the access token? Your privileges. Okay, and then these privileges are matched with access control list. Who has your access control list? The resources which you are about to access. If there is a match, you will be granted access. Okay, all right. So we can have user access controls, and secondly, we can keep our data encrypted. So keeping the data in the database in encrypted form, so only the person who has the corresponding decryption key will be able to access the data. Is this clear? Fine? Alright. Okay. Okay, let's read point number 2 then. Backup controls. You all know backup. Now, is it a preventive, detective or corrective control? Backup is corrective, preventive. Again, there is some confusions. Backup will help you to restore data if something goes wrong with the original data. So it is a corrective measure. Okay. Now, backup refers to making copies of the data so that these additional copies may be used to restore the original data if there is a loss in the original data. So this is what you have to remember in case of backup. Okay. If this question comes, no, please try and understand. If this question comes, what should be the controls? What are the various data resource management control? Write access controls as first point. Second point, we are going to write about backup, and only this much point you have to write. This amount of data. But a question may be separately formed that what are the various backup strategies? Again, this topic has been copy pasted from somewhere else and they have put it here. But this question can be formed, so that is why I'm going to explain to you what are the various backup strategies in an organization. Okay, if they don't ask you this question separately, and if they ask you only about data resource management control, you don't have to write about strategies. Just write that backup is a control. Okay. Now, what we are doing here is we are going to discuss some of the backup strategies, and the first strategy is dual recording of data. Under this strategy, 2 complete copies of the database are maintained. That means, please try and understand, did we discuss something called yesterday, virtual machines? Okay, and I discussed this while I was trying to teach you application areas of virtualization. I told you because of virtualization we have virtual machines. And did we read this point that because of virtual machines actually helps us in disaster recovery. So what happens is whatever update we do here, the same update is done here also. Okay, and if let's say something goes wrong here, will this act as a backup or not? I use the word hot standby. It is a backup, right? So first point is dual recording of data. Under this strategy, 2 complete copies of the database are maintained and the databases are concurrently. So what you do in your production machine means this machine, live machine, the automatic updation helps is also done in your virtual machine. So this machine will act as your backup. Fine. So first strategy is what? We need to have 2 copies of our database. This is known as dual recording of data. Fine. Okay. Then we have periodic dumping of data. Periodic dumping of data is what you actually do to take a backup. Let's say after 20 days in my office, we take a backup on a hard disk. So this is basically what? Periodic dumping. Okay. Is it necessary that all companies take backup after 20 days? Or basically the frequency of taking backup will depend from organization to organization on the severity, on the sensitivity of the data. If companies deal in very sensitive data, if they might take backup every day. If the data is that sensitive, they might take backup every hour. Or in fact, if they cannot tolerate any kind of downtime with the data, they might take real-time backup. So, is this an example of real-time backup or not? Whatever you do in your original machine, same is copied in your virtual machine. Okay. So, second point is periodic dumping of data. This strategy involves taking a periodic dump of all or part of the database. Periodic dump, you understand, no? Did we come across this word earlier also? Dumping of files. Yes. Where? Dumping of files. Yes. Okay. Data leakage. Yes. Where did we study data leakage? In EIS. Asynchronous attack. First point was data leakage, and I told you that leakage means dumping the files out, copying the files. I was trying to explain you the difference between data leakage and wiretapping. Wiretapping is only intercepting, and data leakage means copying the files, dumping the files. Do we have this word there or not? Yes. Okay. All right. So here, but that was unauthorized dumping. This is a part of your organization's policy. Fine? Okay. Now, this strategy involves taking a periodic dump of all or part of the database. And where do you actually take your database? Can it be any storage medium? Can we use a hard disk to take our database? Big companies, they can use magnetic tapes. Okay, some of them whose data size is not much, you can always take database in a pen drive also. Okay, so you can schedule, you can basically take your database backup in any storage medium. And the dump may be scheduled. Scheduled as in, like in my office, we have a fixed frequency of taking data. It is a policy in my office that we take a backup on every week, Friday evening before closing the office, the entire data is backed up. So this is a frequency. It is actually scheduled. Do you understand this? Alright. Now, logging input transactions. You understand the word logging? Okay. Now please understand, let's say, okay, I just gave you the example of my office note. Let's say Friday. As per my policy, Friday before closing the office, we take the backup. So let's say I took a backup on Friday 7 p.m. and Saturday it was an office. Okay, Saturday, let's say around my office starts at 9 a.m. Okay, Saturday, let's say around 11 a.m. something goes wrong with this database and it is not working. It is corrupt. Okay, so what is it that I am going to do now? Yes, the database is no more there. It is not working. What is it that I am going to do now? Have I taken a backup or not? When did I take the backup? Yesterday 7 p.m. Okay, so okay, first what I'll do, I'll restore this database. So I'll restore this, but this database is updated only till 7 p.m. yesterday. But don't you think I have worked between 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. What is going to happen with this? Yes. Now try and understand. If we have a log of whatever we inputted into the machine from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., at least by seeing the logs, don't you think again we can re-enter these transactions? And if we re-enter, obviously our system is going to be up to date. No doubt it is going to take some time. No doubt your time would be wasted by retyping it. But when we have the log, at least we know what has to be re-entered. So this log, don't you think it is helping you to restore your backup? And can I say, please, if you understand, can I say these logs will be used in conjunction with periodic dump? Obviously, you will restore the periodic dump first, and then whatever you have inputted after that log, basically periodic dump, if your things are logged, you can see the log and you can do the re-entry. Okay. So what you are doing here is you are logging all your input transaction. Do you understand this point or not? Alright. So this involves logging the input data transaction which causes changes to the database. Normally it says what? Normally this works in conjunction with a. Do you understand the reason? Fine. So, okay, this is what you have to study here. Any transaction which is done in the system is actually logged. So this is going to help us in as a backup also. Now, is the only purpose of log to is backup or what? Why were we actually keeping logs? And what do you actually mention in logs? Who accessed the system? When did he access the system? What did he do? So what did he do? If we keep a log of all the entries which he has done, we'll be able to restore our systems. Is this clear? Okay. And one more point. Did I tell you something? Okay. Let's say this is our database, and an input transaction is being done. Okay. Now, obviously, when you input something, some processing will go and some output will come. Okay. So what we are trying to do here is read the heading: logging changes to the data. So whatever changes this input data causes to our database, whatever, I am not talking about the input data. Input data we will be separately keeping a log. Point number 3. But now because of this input data, whatever changes are there in the database, whatever changes takes place in the database, we are actually going to record those changes also. What is the now difference between point 3 and 4? Point 3 is logging what? Input. The input. But because of this input, whatever changes is happening in the database, or the output, we are going to log that as well. So how we are going to log that? Before this input, what was the position, and after the input, what is the, so we call it as before and after image. Okay, please let's listen to one example. A customer of mine instructed me to change his address. So what I will be inputting now? The new address. So new address has to be logged. This will come under point number 3. But because of this new address, the database will now be changed. So what change actually occurs? The changes that take place basically before the processing and after the processing, will keep a record of that. So before address and after address will be logged. Okay. So what do we do here is, this involves copying a record each time it is changed by an update action. So all you have to remember is copying a record each time it is changed by an update action. And how do we log it? See, the change record can be logged immediately before the update action, immediately after, as well as both. So whatever changes happens, before the changes actually happen, we'll keep a record, and whatever changes has actually happened, we'll keep a record of that as well. Is this clear? Now, do you understand the difference between point 3 and 4 or not? Fine. So a question may be asked, but the chances are very slim. But once it was there in an RTP, I believe, of CA final. So that is why I've told you. Okay, I did not mention the question. I think it is not there in the list also, but it might be asked. Okay, but I have made it clear to all of you that in case they ask you data resource controls, so you write about backup. You don't have to mention about the backup strategies. All right. Okay. So now we are done with, we have only 6 points in data resource management control. We are done with 2 points. What are the points? Access controls, and then we have backup. Okay. Now, third point is we are going to understand update controls. Okay. Now, do you think all persons should be allowed to make changes to the database? Now, let's say all of you are authorized persons to access the data. Okay. But maybe most of you must be having only read-only access to the data. Some of you only might be having read and write, and probably the ones who can add new data to the database, they do not have the right to delete some data from the. Okay, so we need to have proper update controls in our database. Okay, so what are the update controls? These controls restrict update to the database to only authorized users. Now, update authorization takes 2 forms. One permits only addition of data. I told you this one will be allowed only to, let's say, add data, and second allows only users to change or. Is this clear? So if I allow a person to add data as well as delete data, he'll be having, basically he can change the data, he can add data, he can create havoc with our organization's data. So segregation is there, and we don't allow the persons to add data and the same person to delete data. Okay, is this clear? All right. Now, fifth point is concurrency control. Now, okay, I'll try and give you an example on this first, and then yes. See, I have written here an example that for an order entry system. What do you mean by order entry system? A system which takes in the order, and there is a warehouse process system. Warehouse process will manage what? The quantity, the delivery part, everything. Now, order entry system and warehouse process might update inventory in hand at the same time. These two processes are working on one particular aspect, which is the inventory. Now, what happens is, if two update processes are not controlled, the database can end in erroneous state. Now, both these systems, what are the two systems in my example? Order entry as well as the warehouse management system. Both concurrently pass an entry which actually updates which should actually have updated the inventory part. Now both entries, now when both the entries which are passed update one aspect, the update doesn't happen. Either the update will take place, either the update will be done by this, or sometimes what happens, sometimes what happens, because of the update process which is entered concurrently, there is an error in the database. It might so happen that the inventory is not updated at all. Only the thing is that only one system may make changes in the transaction, in the any let's say data. Now, but we cannot have a control that yes, you are not allowed, you are allowed. It might so happen that two parties or two departments make one common entry at a given point of time. So in this case, what we are going to do, we have to have some controls, and these controls provide solution agreed upon schedules. We need to have schedules, agreed upon schedules, that who is allowed to do transaction when, and strategies to overcome the data integrity problems that may arise when two processes access the same data at the. So in my example, two process, that means order entry system and the warehouse system, were accessing the same, we're updating the same data which is of inventory. So when this happens, there might be an error in the database. So in order to avoid that, we need to have controls. And what are the controls? We need to have agreed upon schedules. Do you understand by what it means? We'll have timelines divided, that this particular department is allowed to make entries only between this and this time. Okay, and when there is an error, no, there is one more control. There might be a need for a manager to intervene. Human intervention might be required to rectify the errors. You can write this aspect. Human intervention might be needed to rectify the errors which result as a result of concurrent updates. Human intervention might be needed to correct errors due to concurrent updates. Okay. Is this clear? All right. Now, quality control, this is very simple. Obviously, you would want to ensure, we need to have controls in our organization so as to ensure that the data's quality is good. Okay, so we just have to remember three words here, that these controls ensure accuracy, completeness, and consistency of data maintained in the database. What do you mean by consistency? Did we read this point when we were discussing the advantages of DBMS? Data independence, data consistency. Rather than having many versions of data, now we need to have one version of the data. So this is basically what? Data consistency. So we need to have controls to ensure completeness, accuracy, and consistency of data. This is what quality controls mean. Fine. Okay. One more point which we have is data definition control. Now, whenever any database or data is created, the first point of basically I can say in life cycle of a data is the definition, is the creation, is to define the data. By defining a data, I mean, now because relational database management systems, you understand a bit about database. Let's say I want to have a data of my customer's phone number. So what is the field name? What can be the field name? Field, you understand the word field? Customer number, phone number, or phone number, let's say. Now, and what do you call, you remember the word domain? Domain is what? Basically, what you are actually allowed to write against the field. Okay. Now, when I design this database, when I define this data mobile phone, don't you think I'll basically configure it that only numbers should be acceptable in this field, and that too how many digits? 10. So this is, you know what I'm doing here, I'm basically defining the data, that this particular data should only consist of numbers, and that too I am defined what? It should have 10 digits. Okay. Now, do you think anyone in this organization should be allowed to change the definition of data? This creation and change of the definition of data should be restricted to only authorized persons, and generally the persons who are actually allowed to do is known as database administrator, DBA. We call them as DBA. So one line is, you have to remember, these controls, definition controls, ensure that the database always corresponds and comply with the definition. What is the definition standard in my example? That phone number should always consist of numbers with how many digits? 10. So what control do you have to, what do you have to mention here? That control should exist so that data in our database always complies with. Do you think our database should accept 5-digit phone number? It should immediately prompt an error. So definition control ensures that database always corresponds and comply with our definition standards. Is this clear? So we have 6 controls in data resource management control. It's quite simple. First point is what?
Access.
Okay, you can go with by that sequence. Access control, then you can go with backup. Then I told you about update. How many update controls? Also 2 points you have to remember. One permits only to add data and the other to change or delete data. In access control also, either you can have access controls in the form of passwords, biometric, and then or you can go for data encryption. Okay, 3 points covered. Fourth was concurrency controls. What happens when two processes try to access same data and they try to update it? Chances are there that there might be errors in the database. So we have to have controls to avoid such kind of errors. What controls can we have? We have to have agreed upon schedules. Which department will be allowed to make transactions when? Or sometimes when this happens, human intervention might be required to rectify the database. Alright? Okay. Then we talked about quality controls. Simple 3 words you have to remember, that control should be there in place to ensure accuracy, completeness and consistency of data. And finally, definition controls. These controls ensure that the data always corresponds or complies to the definition standard. Okay, and again note this definition standard, I only know how badly I have taught you in terms of a layman, because this database standard is basically it's a huge topic. We have different kinds of layers of database standards. We have different types of schemas. We have physical schema, logical schema. So if I start teaching you that is going to be of no use. So here we can, you just remember the example which I have given. For the sake of only if this question comes, you will be able to write. Alright? Okay. Now, I think there are only 2 points now, with 3 points with respect to role of auditor. Auditor should determine what controls are there to maintain data integrity. What controls are there to maintain. Now if you want, you can mention the controls which you have just studied. You can mention about backup. You can mention about quality. You can mention about update, access controls, etc. And he might also interview database users to determine their level of awareness. Whether people who are actually accessing database, whether they have knowledge about the controls which are there or not. So he might use the technique of interview. And then auditors might employ test data. This is a good point. This is a new point. Auditors might employ test data to evaluate whether access control and update controls are working. Now what do you mean by this? Okay, who should be given access to the database? Only authorized persons or not? So now what will the auditor try and do? Auditor will, let's say he gains access, auditor is allowed access to the system. He is going to create, let's say, a fake ID and password, and then he'll try to access the database. If the system allows the access, that means that the database access controls are not good. So this is known as test data. Basically we call it as penetration testing. Okay, for example, an auditor wants to test whether antivirus is working or not. He'll insert a virus, and if the antivirus detects there is a virus, that means antivirus is working. This kind of test is known as penetration testing. This is he is going to insert some test data. He is going to create some fake IDs, and then he is going to see whether update control and access control actually work. All right. Okay. So we are done with data resource management control as well. Alright guys, so the next control that we have to cover under application controls is the database control. Okay, now before I start with this topic, let me just tell you that this is different from what we had covered under managerial controls. Under managerial controls, we had covered a control with respect to data resource management controls, right? But this is database controls. You all know this, that most of the applications they use database. Okay, I even taught you this, that that generally what happens is the application is the logic layer basically, okay, and users basically access this application. The application provides information to the users, but application in turn they access to something which we call it as database. Now for example, very simple example, if you wish to, you just go to amazon.in, okay, and they have the entire interface there. Okay, there is a kind of search box also there. That is an application, let's say. Okay, you search for a black pen. Okay, the pen, all the data with respect to all the products with respect to the black pen will be basically fetched by the application from this database. So it is going to show you all the brands of the pen that they have, along with the pricing, along with the review, along with the pictures, right? So most of the applications, guys, they use database, and hence under the application controls we are going to learn about the database controls. Again, this is different from data controls, data resource management control that we had covered under managerial controls. Under managerial controls, the data resource management that we had discussed was overall data in the organization, but this is with respect to the application. Okay, now let us understand what database control is. Okay, so it says these controls are used within an application software to maintain the integrity of data. So we won't want our database to have any unauthorized modifications in our database. Okay, we would we need to maintain privacy also. So we have to have controls so as to ensure integrity, so as to ensure privacy, that there is no integrity violations as such. Okay, so let us understand the various controls with respect to database. Very extremely simple topic. Okay, now number one point is the basic, the most fundamental control which we can have over a database is basically to restrict the access. So the number one control is access control. Again, a very simple control. You all know, you have the knowledge about access controls, right? So what is access control? It is just to prevent unauthorized access to the database. We won't want any unauthorized user to access our database, right? So it says access controls in database subsystem. Basically it seeks to prevent unauthorized access to and use of data. Okay, second, it says we have to have, the organization has to have a security policy to be specified, followed by choosing an access control mechanism that will enforce the policy chosen. Okay, so see, access controls needs to be there, but then in the organization there has to be overall security policy which is going to ensure that yes, access controls are in force. Okay, so a security policy has to be specified, followed by choosing an access control mechanism that will enforce the policy chosen. So security policy is the main charter document of the organization with respect to protection, right? So the overall security policy needs to be there, and accordingly the necessary access controls will be implemented. Okay, now sometimes what happens, see, database is a very crucial thing. Okay, now for if let's say I have an e-commerce website, the database of all the products, okay, it is very important. So most of the times I might also have a complete replica of my database. It's a big backup, right? So if you remember it can be a hot site as it is backup, it can be on a cloud, it can be physically with me only in another premises, so we can have backups also, right? So this point says, the next point says, if our database is replicated, if we have another database, I mean a copy of it, a backup, okay, so the same access control rules must be enforced by the access control mechanism at each site. So the main database that we have, and wherever we have the backup of the database kept, it may be a hot site, it may be a cold site, it may be at a third party cloud provider. So wherever we have the database backup, there has to be the same access controls that we have it in our original database. Okay, so under access controls, what do we need to understand? Sir, we have to have a the security policy, and according to the security policies, the access control mechanisms needs to be enforced. If our database has been replicated, if we have a backup, the entire backup of our database, then we need to have the same access controls in that particular backup as well. Okay, all right, so access control is done, very simple. Next is integrity. Now we have come across this word so many number of times. Now what do you mean by the word integrity? That there shouldn't be any unauthorized modification to the database, right? So in order to prevent any unauthorized modifications to the database, this particular integrity controls only ensures the accuracy, the completeness and the uniqueness of our database. So whatever data is there, it is accurate, it is complete, okay, and there are no duplicacy basically. Okay, so the integrity controls are, it ensures accuracy of the data, completeness of the data and uniqueness of the data. Now what controls can we have in place to ensure integrity? Of course access controls will be there, because we won't want any hacker to hack into our systems and do modifications in our data, right? So access controls is the first line of defense, I can say. But then an authorized user, if I am an authorized user, I can also make certain mistakes while entering the data, and also, but so we need to have certain controls which ensures that whatever data we have in our database, it is correct, it is accurate, it is complete, okay, and there is no redundancy, duplicacy as such. So how can we ensure that? So number one thing that we can have is basically, first control with respect to this is, we can have integrity constraints. We can have integrity constraints. Now what do you mean by constraint? Integrity constraint, guys, is basically a set of rules. I'll give you a very simple example. Okay, now let's say I'll talk about the domain integrity constraint. I'm not diving much into the details here, but yes, let me just give you an example. Let's say you are filling a form online, okay, and there is the name column, name field is there, your phone number field is there, your email is there. Okay, now in the phone number field, let's, of course it will accept only integers, numbers, right? So in the phone number field, if you write A, of course the form will immediately prompt that there is an error, right? So this is a kind of rule that, okay, this particular phone number field is only going to accept integers. So in a way, if we have such controls in place, it is going to ensure accuracy of our data, our database, right? But then let's say if this control was not there and I just filled ABCD in the phone number, of course then the data that will be created in the database, it is going to be incorrect, right? So we can have certain integrity constraints. Okay, what is integrity constraints? In order for you to understand it better, just you can take a note of it. Okay, so integrity constraints are set of rules. These are certain set of rules. Like for example, I told you, if there is an email field and you just end up writing your name, let's say Rahul, so the system should not accept that email ID. Why? Because @ symbol needs to be there in an email ID, right? So integrity constraints are basic set of rules, and it is used to maintain the quality of information. So we can have integrity constraints. Okay, a lot of controls you have already covered in the input validation part also. Okay, so integrity constraints are should be there. Okay, and so we have covered 2 points, guys, but with respect to integrity, I feel that you can do one more point, which is basically cryptographic control. Okay, now see, integrity simply means that there shouldn't be any unauthorized changes, modifications to the data and all. So whatever data we have in the database, if let's say it is encrypted, okay, so it becomes, let's say, meaningless to any third party or person who is not authorized. So if it becomes meaningless, then of course confidentiality will be maintained. And even if it tries to change it, let's say if we do a one way hashing, encryption, if let's say some type of cryptography is used, then perhaps integrity can be maintained. Okay, so with respect to integrity, please understand there is one more point which you should be covering. It is cryptographic control. It says it is used for protecting the integrity of data. See, it is very clearly written here. It is used for protecting the integrity of data stored in a database, let's say using encryption. So if we encrypt our data, of course privacy will be there, confidentiality will be there, and of course unauthorized modifications and all, it is going to be meaningless for the person who is trying to tamper with the data, right? So in a way it basically helps in protecting the integrity of data, right? So please understand, guys, when if this question is asked, for your understanding part, of course access controls is the first line of defense. With respect to integrity controls, you can of course mention integrity constraints as well as cryptocurrency. So 1, 2, and then you take up point number 5. Okay, all right. Next, coming to the next control, which is application software controls. Application software controls. Okay, so what is this particular control? Let us understand. It says when application software acts as an interface to interact between the user and the database. So you all know this, that application software basically acts as an interface. I have drawn this diagram. So if the user wants to check upon something, if the user wants to know the details of Black Pen, it is through the application which is going to get to know about the Black Pen, the product, right? So application software, it acts as a intermediary, it acts as an interface between the user and the database. You all know this, right? Now it says, let me just read it again. It says when application software acts as an interface to interact between the user and the database, the DBMS depends on application software to pass across a correct sequence of commands and update parameters so that appropriate actions can be taken when certain types of exception conditions arise. Now see, any request the user will make, try and understand, any request the user wants to make, okay, he is going to do it in the application, right? So again, application will have to forward the request of the user correctly to the database. The correct commands needs to be sent. In case the commands given by the user, I mean the product, let's say, or any feature selected by the user, or any, let's say, command given or forwarded by the application software to the database, there is some issue in it. So application the database should basically give an exception report. Okay, now for example, I'll just give you an example. Let's say I was tracking a courier, okay, a parcel. I was supposed to get a parcel from my friend. I was tracking it. But then, what happened? He had sent me the parcel, and it was somehow misrouted. It was somehow misplaced by the courier company. Though I got it eventually, but then it was more than a month's time that he had sent, but I had not received it. Okay, he sent it from Jaipur, and I was in Guwahati, but I couldn't receive it. Okay, so then after 1 month's time, I again tried to track it. Okay, so when I entered the tracking number, of course, see, I am the user. The tracking number, the portal is the software, and from the database, it is going to show as to where my courier is presently, my parcel presently is. So the moment I entered the courier number, the portal displayed a message that only data of those couriers consignments is shown, which is which is in the last 1 month span of time, which has been dispatched in the last 1 month. So old couriers, basically the data they are not going to show. So this was an exception message, right? The database did not provide the data, but rather it gave us exception message that okay, this is something beyond now the application. They are not they cannot display the data which is older than a month's time, let's say. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you here is application control. What does it say again? Let me read it very clearly. It says when application software acts as an interface between the user and the database, the DBMS depends on application software to pass across. The DBMS is dependent on application software to pass across correct sequence of commands and update parameters so that appropriate actions can be taken, so that the database is able to deliver the right information, or let's say if there is some mistake, the database is able to render the right information, okay, so that appropriate actions can be taken when certain types of exception conditions arise. Okay, now in simple words, guys, please understand. Okay, now there has to be, whenever a user requests for something to the application, the correct data needs to be shown. This is the rule. Okay, whenever I'm asking for a black pen, of course the data with respect to black pen should come, right? Now please understand, in order for the correct data to be displayed, we have two controls here, which is, one is update controls and the second one is report control. Now what is update control? It simply means update controls ensure that the changes to the database, whatever changes are made to the database, it reflects changes to the real world entities. Okay, so it says update controls ensure that changes to the database reflect changes to the real world entities. So whatever changes has taken place in the database, it should be reflected here. I mean, users should be able to see it, but there they have used a technical language here. It says update controls ensure that changes to the database reflect changes to the real world entities. So let's say, what is real world entities? Real world entities is nothing, guys. It says it is a unique object in the real world. It can be a single person, it can be about a product, anything. So if let's say we search for a black pen, okay, and this particular pen, the quantity is 10, okay, so let's say the available quantity is 10, okay, so of course the database should maintain the correct quantity that is available, 10, okay, and this information should be shown to the user through the application, right? In case this information is incorrect, let's say there are only 5 pieces left, okay, but then the database is not updated and it is showing 10 quantity, so then this user might order for 10 pieces. Are you able to understand? So what I'm trying to tell you is, read the line again. It says update controls, they ensure that changes to the database, whatever changes has happened to the database, it should reflect the changes to the real world entities, okay. And if there is any issue, please understand, there is one more control here, report controls. It says identify errors or irregularities that may have occurred when the database has been updated. So while the database was being updated, if there is any error or irregularity, it should be shown in the exception report. So we call it as report control. So please understand, guys, what I'm trying to tell you is, when this is the case, okay, we want to ensure that whatever we have in our database, okay, whatever information is there in our database, it is correct, okay. And if while updating the database there is some issue, we need to know about it, right? The system should prompt that there is an issue through report controls, okay. Now please understand, why are we focusing so much that the data must be correct, right? Please understand this, okay. There has to be if there is a change in the database, it should be reflected in the entity as well. What is entity? I have already told you. It should reflect the changes to the real world entities. Real world entities, it can be person, it can be product, it can be an object, guys, okay. So if I talk about an e-commerce website, it can be a product also. All right. So yes, we are done with 4 controls, rather: access controls, integrity controls, application software controls, okay. Now concurrency controls is very much similar to what we have already covered in database data resource management control. Now if 2 people try to update the database concurrently at the same time, okay, there can be an issue, okay. So in order to avoid such thing, we have something called as concurrency control. So in any database we have to have concurrency controls, okay, same as what we had covered in the data resource management control. I gave you the example also there, that there is a sales taking process system and there is, let's say, a warehouse data entry system. They update a product at the same time, let's say, so then there can be an issue, right? So concurrency controls address the situation that arises either due to simultaneous access of the same database or due to a deadlock. Okay, now what is deadlock? Deadlock, again, it is I'll try to be very short here because you might not be knowing. It is a term, let's say, with respect to DBMS. Okay, now deadlock is something, when 2 transactions, 2 processes, 2 resources, let's say two processes, okay, they are waiting for each other indefinitely. Okay, this process believes that the data is going to be given by him, and then it is going to process. This process believes that, okay, it is yet to receive data from this process, and then if it receives data, then only they are going to move ahead. So deadlock is a point, it is a situation rather, wherein 2 processes, they remain idle, they remain, they do not process further because they are waiting for resources from each other. Okay, now if I tell you in very layman's terms example, okay, let's say there is a railway crossing and one train is approaching from here and the other train is approaching from here. Okay, there is a crossing, this train wants to go here. So what is going to happen when there is a crossing? The two trains will stop. Okay, then of course one has to pass and then the second one will pass, right? But then what is deadlocked, that the two trains are waiting now. Okay, this train is thinking that this train is going to pass, but this train is thinking that the other train is going to pass. So there is a kind of deadlock. Okay, so alright, not going much into the details, but yes, what is concurrency controls? Concurrency controls basically address situations wherein, which may arise due to simultaneous access of the same database, simultaneous updation of the same database. Okay, cryptographic control we have already covered, guys. Okay, now again we are covering database controls. Okay, now let's take the example of Tally software. Okay, Tally software is we have a software and we have the database also, right? All the clients and all that we have in our office, we have a database file also, database we have. Okay, now what happens is this particular point, file handling control, it is nothing but, let's say if we keep our database, okay, in any storage medium, let's say it can be an hard disk, it can be a pen drive, it can be a CD drive, it can be a DVD. So we have to have control over that storage medium, right? It shouldn't happen that the storage medium subsequently becomes inaccessible. We were not taking care of the DVD and CD and it was all, it was filled with scratches. Pen drive we were not taking care, it was raining, it was still in my pocket, and then it becomes inaccessible. So file handling controls are basically, they are controls that are used to prevent accidental destruction of data contained on a storage medium. So this is accidental destruction of data which is contained in a storage medium. So these are exercised by hardware, software and the operators or users who load or unload the storage medium. So these controls needs to be maintained, ensured by those who are in charge of the ones who load and unload the data on the storage media, the ones who copy the data. Okay, so this is a very simple control. All right, now so database controls we are done. Very simple. We have access controls to start with, then integrity controls. Please ensure when I talk about integrity controls, mention about integrity constants, because this is one of the controls. And the second control with respect to integrity is cryptographic control. Cryptographic control is nothing but the encryption of the data, guys. Okay, then we have application software controls, then concurrency controls, which we have already covered under data resource management control, and file handling controls, which is basically for preventing accidental destruction of data which is kept on a storage medium. Okay, and then of course, as we have been doing, after each control we cover the relevant audit trail controls also. So with respect to audit trail controls, what do you have to understand? What are the accounting audit trails that needs to be maintained? Number one, unique timestamp to all the transactions. Okay, so timestamp simply means, log should be maintained as to when and from where the transaction was done. So timestamp must be there for each transaction, number one. Second, whenever a transaction is initiated, the before and after images of the transaction needs to be also maintained. Before and after, I mean before the changes to the database happened and what is the position after the changes has taken place. So to attach before images and after images of the data item on which a transaction is applied, and if there are any modifications or corrections to the audit trail transactions. Okay, see, this is a normal transaction, but if there are any changes to be done in the audit trail transactions, again accommodating the changes that occur within an application system. So any modifications or changes to the audit trail transaction, this needs to be also maintained. Okay, not very, very important. And as far as operations audit trail is concerned, guys, you all know this, that chronology of resource consumption needs to be maintained. Okay, that affects the data definition or the database. So if there is any change, what resources were consumed, all these things. So not very important, but yes. So as we have been doing in all the controls, towards the end, the last control that we have been studying is always the audit trail controls. We did it in boundary control, we did it in the input controls, etc. So likewise we have done it in database control also. The content of database control has changed a bit, and this is good. I mean, but yes, most of the concerns, I mean most of the points like access control, update controls, concurrency control, etc., we have already covered in data resource management control. Okay, so with this, the database control part is over. Okay. Okay, so now next control that we have to cover under the application control, the last control that we have to cover is basically the output control. Okay, now see, we covered as to who can access the application. We covered it in boundary controls, we covered the input controls, we covered processing, communication controls, database controls, and now finally, let's say after all the processing and all takes place in the application, it's time to generate the outputs. Okay, so what are the controls that should be there in place with respect to output? Okay, now when you cover this topic, primarily keep in mind two things. Okay, that the output which is generated should be correct. Okay, the system, of course, if the input is correctly done, if the processing is correctly done, if the database was updated, of course the output will be correct. Okay, so output controls ensures that whatever output is generated is correct, and at the same time output controls, when I talk about output controls, the focus area is also that the generated output should be accessible to only authorized persons. I mean, your output, whatever output the system is generated, it shouldn't go into the hands of unauthorized person, right? So these are the primarily two aspects that you need to keep in mind while you are covering output controls. Okay, so let's understand this again. Very simple topic, but yes, it has been changed, the content has been changed, so let us just do it quickly. Okay, so these controls ensure that the data delivered to the users, whatever data is delivered to the authorized users, will be presented, formatted and delivered in a consistent and secured manner. Secured as in it shouldn't go to any person other than the authorized person. Okay, output, guys, it can be in any form. It can be either a database file, it can be a printed data report, it can be hard copy, it can be soft copy also. Okay, so whatever the type of output may be, it should ensure that the confidentiality and integrity of that output is maintained and output is consistent. Okay, so please keep in mind again the two basic things, that when we are covering output controls, the purpose of these controls is to ensure, let's say, integrity of the output produced. I mean, whatever output is generated by the system, it needs to be correct, accurate, and at the same time confidentiality of the output file generated should be maintained. That means it shouldn't go into the hands of any third parties or, let's say, unauthorized person. Okay, now what are the controls with respect to output controls? Okay, let's understand. Number one is inference control. Okay, what does it say? Let us understand. Okay, it says these are used to prevent compromise of statistical databases from which users can only aggregate statistics rather than values of individual data items. Now please try and understand. Okay, this inference control is basically this is a control which is put in place to ensure confidentiality about the persons in the database. Okay, now sir, what is it? What are you trying to tell us? Please try and understand. Okay, let's say there was a research done by a scientist or a doctor, okay, on 600 humans. So he got 300 males, 300 females, let's say, who have certain disease or something, and then he tried and did some experiments for 6 months, and then he published the data. He has accumulated data from each of the individuals. He did all the analysis and then he published something. Okay, now what I'm trying to tell you is, when such data is published, okay, of course the names, the individual data of 300 males and 300 females will never be published. It is always an aggregate data, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is, if any such sort of information is, let's say, published, okay, we need to ensure that the privacy of the persons who responded to those experiments, who were participating in those experiments, that their privacy should not be compromised. Why should anyone else gain access to their individual data, to their individual medical history? No. So inference control basically puts a limit. Okay, let me just read the point here again. It says it is used to prevent compromise of statistical data from which users can obtain only aggregate statistics rather than the values of individual data items. Okay, things will be more clear when we cover the second point. It says these are restriction controls. Inference controls restrict. Okay, so these are restriction controls which limit the set of responses provided to users to try to protect the confidentiality of data about persons in the database. So this is needed to ensure that, okay, aggregate of everything is displayed, but rather than displaying the individual items. Why? Because they need to maintain confidentiality of data about persons in the database. It can be anything about the person. It can be, let's say, his medical records, medical history, whatever, body vitals, etc. So this needs to be preserved. Okay, so please understand, inference controls are basically used to prevent compromise of statistical databases, number one thing, from which users can obtain only aggregate statistics is given rather than the values of individual data items. So rather than giving values of individual 600 patients, aggregate something, summary aggregate of everything will be given. And inference controls ensures that users are not able to take out the data of those individual persons, the patients rather. Okay, so I hope this example will make it clear for you. Why, sir? Because aggregate data is given, not individual data, so as to maintain privacy, confidentiality of the persons in the database. Okay, now, all right, so now before I move ahead with the other output controls, okay, let me just tell you this, guys, that output, you all know this, that output, it can be a batch, there can be two types of processing, and accordingly two types of output will be generated. One is batch processing and one is online processing, which I can also say as real-time processing. Okay, now please understand this. What happens in case of batch processing? Take the example of credit card statement, or if I have a postpaid bill, let's say postpaid mobile phone connection. So what happens? Whatever calls and all, everything I make during the entire month, they accumulate the data, and then towards the end of the month, in the first week of probably the next month, they are going to issue me a bill, right? Similarly, in case of credit card, what happens? Whatever spendings I do using my credit card, let's say I bought 1000 rupees something today, they are not going to immediately give me an invoice and ask me to make the payment. All the transactions that I do in the entire month, probably they are going to accumulate it, and then they are going to give me my credit card statement after the expiry of 1 month's time, let's say, or let's say whenever it is due. So this is basically an example of batch processing. Under batch processing, there is a time gap between the transactions happening and the updation basically. Okay, but let's say let me just put it in this way also, that yes, so let's say for the physical classes, okay, for the physical classes, generally what process we have, we ask the students to fill up a form, and all the forms that we get in one particular day, towards the end of the day, the entries and all are made into the system. So there is a time gap between the collection of data and the happening of the updation of the database. Okay, so this is called as batch processing. But in case of online real-time processing, what happens? If you buy online classes, you pay and immediately you get a confirmation that your payment has been received, whatever it is. Okay, you let's say you buy a ticket on Book My Show, so immediately your ticket is booked, the ticket is generated, right? You book an airline ticket, again, it doesn't make you wait till next day or something, right? Immediately the PNR is generated and you are ready with the ticket and your boarding pass, right? So this is an example of what? Online real-time processing. Okay, now why am I teaching you about processing here? Because under output, if it is a batch processing, if it is a case of batch processing, of course the output will be generated towards the end of the cycle. Okay, and if it is a online processing, output will be generated immediately, right? So we will be discussing controls with respect to both the scenarios. Okay, so if you can see the points here, we have batch, output, production and distribution controls. It is a case of batch processing. So how will the batch processing reports be generated and distributed? Okay, and similarly we have one more point here, online output production. How will the online processing reports will be generated, output will be generated and distributed? Okay, and distribution controls. Okay, so these are the two scenarios that we have to cover. It's very, very simple, so let us do it, guys. Okay, so batch output, again, as we have discussed, guys, output can be in any form. It can be printed data report, database file, it can be in the form of image, it can be text, it can be graph, chart, anything, right? So batch output in the form of, it can be in the form of tables, graphs, images, etc. Okay, is produced at same operations facility and distributed to the users of the output. So it is produced at some operations facility and then it is distributed to the users of the output. This includes several controls like, so in case of batch, what should be the controls. So when I talk about batch processing, remember the examples that I have given you: postpaid bills, credit card statements, etc. Okay. The registration for the physical classes in my institute. So we take all the forms, and then at the end of the day it is processed. Or maybe it might so happen that we take up forms for 7 days, and once the registration is closed, then we process it in the systems. Okay, where we enter all the details of the students manually. Okay, so this is an example of what? Batch processing. There is a time gap between happening of the event and updation in the system. So in case of batch processing, what control should we have on output, production and distribution? Let us understand. Okay, so number one point, there are so many points, and most of the points, guys, you see that we have it in common in online output, production and distribution also, but one or two points will be different also. Okay, so let's understand. It says report program execution controls. Now number one, first of all, whosoever is able to generate the output, okay, he should be an authorized person. Okay, number one, see, only authorized people should be able to log in to the systems which is able to generate the output, and then they might take a file, or it might be a database file, or they might take a printout also. So number one point is, whichever program is used to generate the output, to execute the output, okay, it should be only accessible to authorized users. So the point is report program execution controls. It says report program execution. Report program as in the software which generates the reports. Okay, it should be accessible to only authorized users and are permitted to execute batch report programs, and these events are logged and monitored. So even if an authorized person accesses the software which generates the output, whenever he logs into the software, everything should be recorded, monitored, it should be logged. So who accessed the output generation software, at what time did he access, what are the reports that he took a printout of, everything will be logged. Okay, so the point here is, please understand, number one, that whatever program is used to generate the output, it should be accessible by only authorized users, and whenever they try to access it, it should be logged as well as monitored. Number one point. Okay, now second and third point are with respect to printing. I told you, see, output generation, it can be, we have already discussed this aspect. It can be a printed data report, it can be a file also, it can be a PDF also, right? So these 2 points, B and C, that we are going to cover, it is with respect to, guys, printing. Okay, now what happens, please understand. When I started with the output controls, I told you to keep 2 things in mind, that whatever output is generated, okay, it needs to be correct, and this correct output needs to only go to whom? The authorized persons. I mean, the confidentiality of the output needs to be preserved. Okay, now what happens, we have 2 points on printing. I'm going to take a point number C first. Okay, it says printing controls ensure that output is made on correct printer and unauthorized disclosure of printed information does not take place. So you, as an employee, if I am trying to generate some outputs, as an employee, I need to know that which printer needs to be selected. Okay, now if there are multiple printers, okay, one is a colored printer, one is a big dot matrix printer for taking out big reports, okay, and one is a normal laser printer. So as an employee of this organization, I should know as to what which printer I should be using. Unnecessary, why to take colored printouts? Of course it is going to be expensive, and also I need to know how to I should be trained, employee should be trained enough to choose the correct printer. Okay, and also you need to understand that, see, in a big organization, a lot of other users will be sharing one printer. So the moment you print something, it's your responsibility to go near the printer and take out the printouts. Okay, else what is going to happen, if it remains in the tray of the printer, somebody else is going to give a printout, and then he or she is not going to notice, and then he's going to take the entire sheet, whatever is there in the tray. So you have to be very careful that whenever you give a print, select the right printer and promptly be prompt enough to collect the same once the printing is done. Okay, all right, so one more control with respect to printing that I wish to discuss. This is basically spooling. Okay, now spooling file controls. Now what is spooling? Try and understand this first, and then you are going to learn, you understand this point. Okay, now let's say okay, this is a system. Okay, this is a system which I am using right now, let's say. Okay, and to this system this is a printer which is connected. this is a printer. Okay, to this system a printer is connected. So let's say I have to print 8 files. Okay, I give the commands first file, second file. Let's say first file is being printed. First file is of 25 pages. Okay, and once, see, I give the print command, of course what is going to happen, the printer, the data, the print that needs to be given, the file that needs to be printed, it is going to go to the printer and the printing will start, right? So meanwhile, once the printing is going on, I can do my other works on the system, right? Let's say I want to give another printout. I want to take another print of another file, PDF number 2, which is again of 20 pages. So I can give the print command. Okay, no doubt the printer is busy at the moment because it is printing file number 1, but I can give the print command for file number 2 also. Likewise, I can give the print command for file number 3 also. Yes, as and when the printer is going to be free, let's say file number 1 is over, printing is over, so automatically file number 2 will start printing. Once 2 is over, automatically file number 3 will start printing. So what I'm trying to tell you is, as a user, I don't have to wait for the printer to become free and then only I can execute the print command. No, right? So what happens, please be very careful on this. Let's say I started with file number 1. I gave the print command, the printer was available, so immediately the printing started. 20 to 25 pages, file 1. Again, immediately I give file 2 print command. So now the printer is busy, right? So what is going to happen, please understand, this file 2 will now be temporarily stored. Please understand, this file 2, the file which needs to be now printed, file 2 will now be temporarily stored in the system. Okay, and it will be sent to the printer only when the printer is available. Okay, this concept is known as spooling. Whatever files you wish to basically give a printout of, you can give the command, but it will be in a queue. There will be a queue form that you must have seen also, right? In your lab systems also, you can see that the queue is being made. Okay, this is printing, next is file number 2, file number 3. So the queue is generated. Okay, what I'm trying to tell you is, why is this? This is a facility for us. This is a feature. Spooling is a feature. This allows you to focus on your work. I mean, you just give the print command, as and when the printer will be available, the print will happen. Meanwhile, in this computer, you don't have to wait. You can just do on your work. Yes, you can do on your regular work. So now what I'm trying to tell you is, let's say you gave the print command. Okay, let's say the file number 2 was an Excel file, a balance sheet. Okay, you gave the print command, the balance sheet was matching, you gave the print command. Okay, but then because the file is now being temporarily stored here, I mean in a queue, what if somebody gains access to this temporary storage and makes modifications to your file? Maybe you saw that, okay, the balance sheet is matching, 20 lakhs asset, 20 lakhs liability, done. You are happy that the balance sheet is matching, but then when you take a printout, when you have the printout in hand, hey, what is this? Why is there a difference? Okay, what happened is, if we don't have proper controls in place, perpetrators, malicious users, they might even try to compromise the integrity of the file which is stored temporarily here. The temporary storage also can be compromised. So we need to have proper controls with respect to spooling. This concept is known as spooling. Spooling is basically sending the files to a temporary location, and when the printer is available, the file will go here for the print to happen, right? So in this intermediary, in this temporary storage also, penetrators, the hackers can play some game, right? So we need to have proper spooling controls. Okay, spooling file controls, let us read this. It says, spooling file controls ensures so that the users can continue working while a queue of documents waiting to be printed on a particular printer, to ensure, now please understand, these controls ensure that the waiting files, the files which are in the queue to get printed, shall not be subject to unauthorized modifications. Okay, so I hope this is clear. So the files which are waiting to be printed, it should not be subject to any unauthorized modifications. Else you will think that, okay, my balance sheet matched and everything is sorted, but then when the printout comes, it will be different. So this shouldn't happen, right? So we need to have proper controls over the spooled file also. Spooling printing controls we call as spooling file controls. Okay, so these are the 2 points, guys, with respect to printing. All right, now again, I told you, so we have report collection controls. Please understand, I told you, let's say you gave the print command. Okay, it's your duty to collect the reports also from the printer. Okay, or let's say you have to get some reports from somebody. So collect it in a timely manner. See, a very common sense, a logical point is, if your report, if an output is ready, okay, the collection of the time gap between the generation of the reports and the collection should be as much less as possible. Because if I generate a report and 10 days it has happened that you were supposed to take it, but you have not collected it yet, it might get misplaced, things might go into the hands of some other persons, right? So please remember this, that the time gap between generation of a report and the collection of the report should be minimum. Okay, so collect the reports timely manner, okay, immediately, to avoid any unauthorized disclosure and data leakage. Okay, similarly, please understand, it says report distribution controls. Let's say you took a printout of something and you have to give it to the right person, so we need to ensure controls over distribution also. It says again, the time gap between generation and distribution of reports is also reduced. If you want to collect it, then also the time gap between generation and collection should be less. And if I have to give it to you, if I have to distribute it, again, I need to ensure that the time gap between generation of the reports and distribution is less, so that it doesn't, it is only given to the persons who are actually authorized to get it. Okay, then we have again storage controls. Let's say I generated a report, but then you did not come to collect, nor I did I distribute it to you. So I have kept it, so that next time you come, I'll give the report to you. So then when I'm keeping your reports in, I shouldn't be keeping it just like on my table and also any client comes and he is going to see your report. No, what I'm trying to tell you is, these reports, it belongs to you, so it shouldn't be, come into the hands of any person. So I should ensure that these reports are kept, properly. So storage controls ensure proper perseverance of output in an idle environment, secured storage of output, and appropriate inventory controls over the stored output. So it simply means that whatever output we are storing, whatever reports, printouts we have taken for you, and it should be secured in a proper manner. It shouldn't get into the hands of any third parties. This is the point. Okay, and then we have final retention and destruction controls. Okay, now please understand, guys, retention control basically means the time duration for which the output shall be retained. Okay, so generally what happens is, generally, let's say if a file is created, if I give you an output, okay, so it might have a life, okay, that this is going to be available to you from this and this period. After 6 months it is going to expire, something like this. So what is retention? Please understand, it is the time duration for which the output shall be retained, and then once the retention period is over, and it will be destroyed when not required. So unnecessary outputs, nothing, it's not, if it is not needed, it can be destroyed. Okay, now see, retention and all, generally, if I tell you in very simple terms, okay, it is generally determined by the statute. For example, in case of books of accounts of a company, you all know this, that the retention period is how much? As per Companies Act, it is 8 years, right? So for 8 years at least, all the books of accounts and all, if it is maintained in the system, should be maintained by the company, right? So retention limit is generally prescribed by the law. Okay, and of course, if it is not a document with respect to law or something, if it is an internal document, then of course the organization's policy and all, they determine the retention period. Okay, so these are certain controls, guys, with respect to just remember the headings and you will be good to go. Okay, so this was with respect to batch processing, the outputs generated, output production and distribution in case of batch processing. But in case of online, what is going to happen? In case of online, let's say I told you I can generate output online, right? So I booked the ticket is generated online, I can just take a printout. Okay, I can keep a printout with me, I can log into my net banking, I can take my savings bank statements, the output is generated online, right? So the controls more or less are same, but there are few changes. Let's understand. So online output production and distribution controls, the point that we covered was batch output production. So there is a difference. Okay, this is with respect to batch. Okay, and online, basically the transactions updations, it takes place in real time. So this is online output production and distribution controls. Okay, so again, what are the controls? Let's understand. Number one is source control, which ensures that output which can be generated or accessed only is authorized, complete and timely. So whatever output is generated, number one, see, source control ensure that output which is generated or accessed online is authorized, complete and timely. Now please understand, guys, when will an output be correct? Only when the source was correct. if the input is wrong, of course the output will be wrong. So input should be correct, the processing should be correct, then only we can say that the output is right. So number one is source control ensures that output which can be generated or accessed online is authorized, complete and timely. Okay, then we have distribution controls. Now please understand, prevent unauthorized copying of online output when it was distributed to a terminal. So there should not be any unauthorized copying. Okay, please understand, generally what is going to happen in case of batch controls, in case of batch reports, a printout is taken and let's say distributed to the users. But if you have generated something online, okay, let's say I logged into my bank and they have now allowed me to download my savings account statement. So when the communication is taking place between my system and their system, okay, there has to be proper communication controls also, so that no unauthorized hacker comes in between the communication. Okay, so it says communication controls should be there to reduce exposures from attacks during the transmission. If I am logging into my net banking, I am giving the important credentials, I am typing my user ID, my password. If OTP comes, I am giving an OTP. So these information should be protected. It should move in a secured, there should be a secured connection between these two devices, I mean bank server and my system, right? There shouldn't be any hacker accessing it. Okay, if you remember, wiretapping and the piggybacking, etc., it shouldn't happen. Okay, so there should be proper communication control also in case of online output. Okay, so distribution controls, communication controls. Then we have again same point, retention controls to evaluate for how long the output is to be retained, and deletion controls to delete the output once expired, same point. Okay, then disposition controls, again this is a control with respect to basically actions that can be taken on the online output when they receive. Disposition basically means these are controls which educates the users, the employees, that what actions that can be taken on the online output when they receive it. Let's say sometimes instruction is also given, that once you receive some online reports, this is the password that you will need to open it. Your password will see your PAN number followed by your date of birth, all these things. Okay, so this is disposition controls. Okay, then receipt controls to evaluate whether the output should be accepted or rejected. Let's say if it is prompting you to download something, so it is up to us. I mean, receipt controls is basically to evaluate whether the output should be accepted or rejected. Okay, so review controls to ensure timely action of intended recipients on the output. If any action needs to be done, so you review output is basically timely action of intended recipients on the output. I think we missed a point with respect to review. Yeah, we have it here also, review controls. Okay, so it basically ensures users should obtain higher quality output. Okay, and detects any irregularities in the output. Okay, so don't learn them, guys. Okay, few points if you are able to remember, it is fine, but then yeah, mostly the points are same. But yes, the only difference is this is a case of batch output generation, and here we have online output generation. Okay, now in case of batch output generation, one more point that I wish to discuss here is that if let's say I am on a system, this is a software that I am using, and you are a stakeholder in the company, or you are a customer and you want certain reports. So I'll just log into the report generation software and I'll give a printout to you, right? So what I'm trying to tell you here is, in case of batch reports, okay, the design, I mean the reports, whatever information comes in the report, okay, it should be designed in such a manner that all the controls are ensured. I mean, it passes through all the controls and then the data comes to the report. Okay, so it simply means batch report design features should comply with the control procedures. Please understand this word. Whenever a report is designed, batch report is being designed, it should comply with all the control procedures, okay, laid down for them during the output process. So whatever information is going to come into the report, it should pass through all the controls. Okay, all right. So the information incorporated in a well-designed report shall facilitate its flow through the output process and execution of control. So I told you, so if there are proper controls at every step, then of course the output will be correct. So whenever we are designing a batch report, I mean, okay, so whatever information is going to come into that report, it should pass through all the controls, okay, ultimately, and that is why we have all the step-by-step controls at the input level, processing level, etc. So we have controls at various levels, so ultimately so that the output can be correct. Okay, so you can mention this control also. So in all guys, we have 4 controls we have covered, and last control is of course with respect to the audit trails. So just remember, in case of accounting audit trails, very easy. What output was presented to the user, we have a log can be maintained for this, that this is the statement that was generated. Okay, who received the output, when the output was received, and what actions were taken with the output. Okay, and with respect to operations, we just need to keep a record of the resource consumption, resources consumed. So to maintain a record of resources consumed, so whether it was a hard copy or a soft copy. If it was a hard copy, where there graphs, images, reports, printing time, how much printing time did it take. If it is just to be shown online, if the report doesn't need to be printed, but you have to just view it, so what is the display rate to produce the various outputs? Not very important, but yes, this is there in our syllabus. Okay, so with this guys, the output controls is also over. A bit modification is there, but then again, see, if you covered the old the content also, overall as such the concept hasn't changed. Overall concept with respect to database control, output controls has not changed. The purpose is same. Yes, the points have changed to some extent. Okay, so our database controls and output controls is over. Alright, so in chapter number 4 guys, we have this concept of digital payments, right? And where we studied the traditional methods of digital payments, and we also have the new methods of digital payments. So under the new methods, this particular content has been added, which is basically a new method of digital payment, e-rupee. Okay, so what is e-rupee all about? We'll go to the content here, but before this, let me just take you through the content on a particular website I found. So what is e-rupee? Let me just try and explain it from this part. We have an example here also which is going to make things very clear to you. Okay, so e-rupee is basically a digital voucher. It is a kind of a gift voucher. Okay, it is a kind of like the gift vouchers which a beneficiary gets on his phone. So somebody is going to get it on his phone either through an SMS or through the QR code. Okay, now it is a prepaid voucher which he or she can go and redeem at any center that accepts it. Okay, so it is a kind of prepaid voucher which, let's say if I am the beneficiary, I am going to get it on my mobile phone through an SMS or a QR code. And this particular voucher will be accepted only at some centers. Okay, some accepting centers, some centers that accept it, so I can redeem this gift voucher, prepaid voucher. Okay, now very good example they have mentioned here. For example, if the government wants to cover a particular treatment of an employee in a specified hospital, it can issue an e-rupee voucher for the determined amount through a partner bank. The employee will receive this voucher through an SMS or QR code on his smartphone, and he or she can go to the specified hospital, avail of the services and pay through the e-rupee voucher received on his phone. So please be very careful guys now that this particular form of payment voucher is person specific and purpose specific. Very important to understand. This voucher is person specific and purpose specific. Now this particular system was introduced, this particular e-rupee concept was introduced to have a payment system which is leak proof. What happens in most of the government schemes and all, you all know how things work. If some amount is sanctioned, what some percentage perhaps is used for the scheme, and the rest goes to into the pockets of all the officers and the concerned people, right? So in order to ensure a leak proof payment system, the government has come up with this concept of e-rupee. Now again, what are the things that we have just covered? Number one, it is a prepaid kind of voucher. It can be redeemed by the person at accepting centers for a specific purpose. Okay, now please try and understand this, that I have mentioned now in the notes here. Let us go through it. It says it is like a prepaid gift voucher, that we have already covered this, that will be redeemable at specific accepting centers, let's say hospitals. Okay, without any credit card or debit card or mobile app or internet banking. Why? Because this prepaid voucher is going to be delivered to the beneficiary through the SMS or QR code. It is no doubt a cashless and contactless digital payment method, but here we don't have to have any credit card, debit card, smartphone, no need internet, mobile banking, nothing, but the voucher is going to be delivered to the beneficiary through SMS or through a QR code. Okay, now very important point to understand, these vouchers are person and purpose specific. Please understand this, person and purpose specific. According to the government, e-rupee is expected to ensure a leak-proof delivery of welfare services. Now, the purpose, the intent is to come up with a leak-proof delivery of welfare services. I have given an example here. It can also be used for, let's say, delivering services under schemes meant for providing, let's say drugs and nutritional support under mother and child welfare schemes, TB eradication programs, tuberculosis eradication programs, drugs and diagnostics under schemes like Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, fertilizer subsidies, etc. So if this particular method can be used in delivery of these welfare services. So the intent behind coming up with this particular concept, method of digital payment, is to come up with a leak proof delivery, leak proof system of payments. Okay, so please understand, these vouchers are now person specific and purpose specific. It will be used only for that purpose, only by that person. Okay, so there will be no misuse now. Okay, or else what happens, if the government gives some money for a particular purpose, it hardly gets spent, and whatever cash let's say government earlier used to give, how it is misused. Okay, so now with the concept of e-rupee, it is cashless, contactless, and of course you have to understand that it is person and purpose specific. So it will ensure a leak proof delivery of, please remember these words, leak proof delivery of welfare services. All right, so great. Let me just see if there are any other points that can be used. So I have already told it is contactless, cashless, done. Okay, and yes, e-rupee, this e-rupee, it should not be confused with digital currency. You must have heard it in the news and all that RBI is coming up with digital currency. So then don't get confused that e-rupee is digital currency. That digital currency is totally different. Instead, e-rupee is person specific, even purpose specific digital voucher. You have to remember this point, that e-rupee is person specific and even purpose specific digital voucher. Okay, so yes, we are done with e-rupee, also the new method of digital payment. Okay, done. All right, now I've already told you that we have a major content addition in chapter 4. We have a new concept altogether on blockchain. This I'll be discussing it in a separate video. Okay, now coming to the amendment part of chapter number 5, we have one particular amendment here wherein content has been added, and the question is basically key technology components. Okay, we are talking about the CBS, and we need to understand that in CBS what are the key technology components. Okay, now if you are following this book of mine, if you have this book of mine, okay, and it is, the topic is on page number 4, 5.4, chapter number 5, page number 4. Okay, so you can just refer it from the book if you have it. Okay, now what are the key technology components of CBS? Okay, please understand, there are 5 components. Okay, there are 5 components. What are the 5 components? Let me just write it for you. First is, we have to have a database environment. There are 5 components. Okay, then we have application environment. Then we need to discuss about the cyber security aspect, because in case of banks, security is a major concern. So we are going to learn about cyber security. This is the third point. Then we have data center and data disaster recovery, data center and let's say disaster recovery plans, or let's say disaster recovery center. Okay, and finally we have monitoring of online transaction. Okay, so you can see this that we have 5 heads. Okay, 5 components are there. Okay, as such there is no change in the components, guys, but yes, they have added few points in this particular aspect. Okay, so let us discuss the entire all the components in detail, not an issue. So let's discuss the key components, key technology components of CBS. Okay, so first is database environment. first key component of CBS is database environment. Now this simply means this consists of centrally located database servers that store the data of all the branches of a bank. You all know this, guys, that the banks, they have centralized database servers. Okay, they everything, you know, they have centralized database. If you have an account in a particular branch in Guwahati, but still you can access your bank from Delhi, from internet banking, from the ATMs in Mumbai, from Chennai, anywhere else you can go to any branch also in Chennai and then access the bank account, right? Why is it possible? Because banks have centralized servers, okay, which can be accessed. Now it says, of course, it says that this consists of a centrally located database servers that stores all kinds of data. What all data will be kept in this particular this particular server? It includes customers master data, the interest rates, what is the account type, etc., all kinds of data. Okay, so if I talk about the technology component, number one technology is basically that the banks have to have database which is centrally located. Okay, now this is a database. You all know this. In order for us to access, let's say, the database, we have to have application software. Now if I am a customer of a bank, I need to check my balance in the savings account. Of course the data will be given by the database, but I cannot directly access the database. I'll have to log in online first, or maybe through my mobile application, right? So when I log in online, they have an entire software there. I need to put in my user ID, password. If there is an OTP, I'll type in the OTP, and then perhaps I'll gain access to the data, right? So applications next technology component in core banking systems, is basically the application environment. So application environment consists of the application servers. Database environment will consist of what? The database server. Okay, and application environment will consist of a server wherein the application of the bank resides. Okay, so it is basically application server. Now bank might be using different kinds of software. Some bank may be using Infosys, let's say Finacle. Some might be using Bankmate. Some might be using TCS Banks, BANCS. If you remember, we have covered the different vendors also. Okay, the name of different vendors: Finacle, Fin1, FlexCube, etc. So it says application environment consists of the application servers that host different core banking systems like FlexCube, Bankmate, etc. And it is also centrally used by different banks. It is also a central server. So we have got two kinds of servers. One is database server and one is application server. Okay. Now before I dive into this aspect, guys, I am going to deal with point number 4 first. That is the data center. Okay. Now what is data center? If I ask you, in a very layman's terms, if I want to tell you, imagine the data center as an infrastructure wherein all the different kinds of database reside. Okay, so all the different kinds, not database, sorry, all the different kinds of, the servers reside. Okay, so we can have an application server, we can have the database server, we can have the web server, website server, the server, the systems wherein the bank's website is hosted. So all the servers of a bank, okay, they are in a data center. So you know that, okay, database environment, when I covered, this is basically the database server, this is the application server, but they are maintained in a data center, right? So the bank should have proper controls over the data center. Okay, we need to have proper physical access controls, logical controls, of course environmental controls on this data center, right? So data center and disaster recovery, let us understand. Okay, I hope you are clear on the concept of data center. We have discussed it earlier also. Okay, so data center and disaster recovery center, it says the core banking systems consist of data centers. You all know this, which includes what all will be there in the data center: application server, database server, web server, etc., and various other technological components. Okay, so the bank should adopt full-fledged documentation and prepare necessary manuals dealing with disaster recovery. What if, sir, something goes wrong in this data center? So because bank is so much data centric, so much dependent on the data, the technology, the bank should have, basically they might have backup of this entire data center. Okay, the banks must have basically disaster recovery plans in place, that if something goes wrong in this data center, if something goes wrong in the servers, they need to have some backups. Okay, and these disaster, the data centers might be completely at a different location, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is, it says the banks must have disaster recovery procedures. They must have arrangements for alternate connectivity also. What if there is some issue in the connection? Now the various branches, they are not able to connect to the server. Many times you see that when you go to SBI, they say there is no link right now, right? So they have to have alternative connections also, okay? Or arrangements for alternative connectivity of the banks with the data center should be established whenever there is a disruption in the primary connectivity, okay? And then see, we need to protect this data center, so there has to be adequate controls with respect to, I've already told you, there needs to be adequate controls with respect to physical access, logical, environmental, etc. Of course, the ones who are there in the data center, I mean, there has to be proper awareness created amongst the employees. Periodic training should be given to them, and there should also be mock drills. If this happens, what are they going to do? If all of a sudden the data is lost in any manner or so how are they going to recover it, or how they are going to migrate to the backup, the data center which has been backed up, okay? So please understand this, that data center and disaster recovery centers are basically, what if something goes wrong in the main center, they need to have proper disaster recovery plans in place. They need to have business continuity plans in place, okay? All right, now this was the third component that we have covered, and let us now cover the fourth part also, the fifth point, basically monitoring of online transactions, okay? So online transaction monitoring component should be there. Why? For fraud risk management. Now please understand, when we started with the chapter, we discussed about the features, the banking features, okay, key features of a banking business. I told you that there large volume of money is involved, then a large value of monetary items is very high. The banks operate through a wide network of branches, and the chances of fraud is also very high in case of banks, right? Because so much of high value security, so much of cash, money, they all deal with it, right? So this particular component is basically online transaction monitoring for fraud risk management, okay? So it says risk evaluations are carried out, and considering the risk profile and other regulatory requirements of the bank, effective monitoring should be done as a part of managing fraud risk management. So this is an essential component, that whatever transaction is happening, whatever technology that they have to have a proper monitoring mechanism in place. They need to have an effective monitoring system in place. This should be a part of their fraud risk management, okay? And there should also be methods that facilitate fraud reporting in CBS environment. So the system should have a module, they have a mechanism for reporting any kinds of fraud, and proper alert system should be there to identify any changes in the log settings, and the audit logs pertaining to the user actions are captured. So there has to be proper logs also with respect to user access and user actions, okay? So in short, guys, what I'm trying to tell you is that bank, the possibility of banks, because they deal with money directly and all, it is very high. So there has to be a proper monitoring mechanism of transactions, and there also needs to be a system in the CBS inbuilt system, that when there is a fraud, there has to be some reporting mechanism, okay? Now, having understood this, let us come to the main part which has changed, okay? If the content in red, of course it has changed. So we are discussing the technology components. Of course, there will be servers, there will be application servers, database servers, the entire data center, okay? But then a very important concern for the bank is basically security. They have to have robust infrastructure systems, controls in place to ensure security, okay? Now, if I am a customer of a bank wherein there is always some sort of issues, I mean, the customer accounts get hacked very oftenly, and I have heard people saying that their money was transferred to a different account and the bank is not able to trace it, and also, no, of course the bank is going to lose a lot of reputation here, okay? And of course nobody would like to be a customer of such kind of bank wherein they don't have proper controls, right? So cyber security is a very, very important element for any banks, okay? So here some new content has been added. So comprehensive cyber security framework is prescribed by RBI for banks to ensure effective information security governance. So some key features of cyber security framework as prescribed by RBI for banks are as under. Now I feel guys that from this portion a separate question can be asked also in the coming attempt. Okay, so some key features of cyber security framework as prescribed by RBI. They might not ask you the entire question, but rather only focus on this aspect, that what explain or mention few key features of cyber security framework as prescribed by RBI for banks. Okay, so now this topic, the key security features, the cyber security framework as prescribed by RBI for banks, we are going to cover it up in two parts. One is with respect to network security. Okay, you have to now recall network access controls and all that we covered under logical access controls. Okay, so network security, and then we have application security also. Okay, network security and application is the CBS, the softwares that the bank use. So we are going to learn about the entire cyber security framework in two parts. One is with respect to the networks, and the second one is application security. Okay, so very simple, let's understand. Now with respect to networks, okay, what controls should the bank have in place? So you have to now recall network access controls. Okay, so the banks need to have, you know, proxy servers. I have taught you this earlier. What is proxy server? They need to have firewalls, intrusion detection system to protect network from any malicious attacks. Very simple. See, these are the words, terminologies which you already know. Okay, now they need to have different LANs. Okay, for in-house on-site ATM and CBS branch network. Now please understand, for ATMs and for CBS, the banks, okay, they need to have different LAN segments. See, what is LAN? I mean, let's say if there is a ATM, of course it is connected to the server, right? The branches are also connected to the server, so there needs to be different LAN segments. Why? If there is only one LAN, if there is one wire through which everything is connected, it will be, you know, it will, as and when the number of users increases, it will become very slow. The banking operations will become very slow, right? So they need to have different LAN segments for ATM. Let's say it may be an in-house or on-site ATM. In-house on-site means, let's say if this is a bank premises, and we have the ATM right here. You must have seen, right? In banks only they have the ATMs, and it might be an off-site ATM also. You are going all of a sudden you are walking along the footpath, and all of a sudden there is a small outlet of, let's say, a bank ATM. So that is off-site. Okay, so different LAN segments that needs to be there for ATM and CBS branch network to confirm that adequacy of bandwidth, so that adequate bandwidth is available. Okay, to deal with the volume of transactions so as to prevent slowing down and resulting in lower efficiency. So you all know bandwidth also, right? And now there has to be different LAN segments for ATMs and for the branches. Why? Because as and when the volume increases, it shouldn't result in slowing down of the operations. Okay, next. Again, these are certain network devices, so there should be proper usage of routers, hubs and switches. Then they need to do a periodic security review of the systems and terminals to assess the network's vulnerability and identify the weakness. See, bank security is of utmost importance, so periodically they need to keep on reviewing their systems and terminals so as to check whether there is any weakness, and if there is any weakness, immediately the actions can be taken upon. Okay, then identification of the risk to ensure that the risks are within the bank's risk appetite and it is managed appropriately. Okay, so these 2 points basically. Okay, what I feel, guys, yes, you can mention okay, 1, I'm just numbering, and 2. 1 and 2 basically are about, one is basically all the controls that proxy servers needs to be done, then has to be in place, firewalls, IDS. Okay, and then it says point number 2, which I have mentioned here, it says ensure secure network configuration. Your network devices, this is with respect to the network devices, they need to be secured. This is with respect to the network controls. Okay, and then we have a point on that, different LAN segments should be there for ATM and for the branches. Okay, and then you need to do a periodic review. Periodic review must be done by the banks, and if there is any risk identified, ensure that the risk is within the risk appetite of the bank and it is managed properly. So this was a guy's point with respect to network and security and configuration. Let us now talk about application security. Okay, so again it says any point about security, if you have to write, you can mention this point of security policy, because I've been telling you guys that security policy is the main charter document. Okay, so this security policy, everything in the organization is done in terms of the security policy, right? So any organization, any bank, they must have a full-fledged security policy to ensure, again, the three words, CIA of data and information. Okay, and now let us understand the specific controls. Okay, so full-fledged security policy to ensure confidentiality, integrity and availability of data and information needs to be developed and implemented, covering the following key features. Okay, so number one, all the banks, they should have bank specific email domains. Okay, we are just learning the controls. Bank specific email domains, this simply means, okay, if I am a banking staff, okay, I shouldn't be allowed to use Gmail, Yahoo in the bank's network. If I am a employee of SBI, so probably, let's say, I should have an email, let's say Chandan @sbi.gov.in, or not SBI, let's say SBI.in, whatever domain that they have. I'm not sure about the domain of SBI, but yes, @SBI. It shouldn't happen that they are allowed to use Gmail and all the private emails. Okay, so they need to have bank specific email domains. What do you mean by domain? Whatever comes after @, it has to be bank specific. Okay, so SBI dot let's say it may be like, let's say SBI.net.in. okay, let's say I am the employee XYZ @SBI.net.in. so this is a bank specific domain. Okay, they need to have bank specific email domains. They need to have anti-phishing and anti-malware software to prevent malicious prevent malicious networks from, or let's say software, etc., from infecting the networks. Okay, so 3 points we have covered here. They need to have what? Bank specific email domains. They need to have anti-phishing and anti-malware software. Okay, all right. Now, two-factor authentication. You all know this. This is an extra step added to the login process, such as code sent to the user's phone or fingerprint scan that helps verify the user's identity and prevents cyber criminals from accessing private information. Now, please understand this, guys. I am an employee of a bank. I will be able to access CBS, right? Okay, you are a customer, you come to the branch. Of course, I'll be able to check and tell you your account balance. But as a customer also, can you also directly access the CBS? The answer is yes. Through your net banking, you can also access the CBS directly, right? So two-factor authentication basically means when you as a user, I mean customer, you are trying to access the CBS, probably you will type in your user ID password. Along with that, you might also get an OTP. OTP is what? Two-factor. Two-factor authentication means not just user ID and password, but some extra control. So it can be in the form of OTP. But if I am an employee, of course, generally what happens, I need to type in, if I am trying to access gain access to the CBS, I'll have to type in the login ID password. Along with that, I might have to scan my fingerprint there. There will be a small biometric device. I'll have to put in my thumb there, and then I'll be granted access. So two-factor authentication should be there for both the customers as well as the employees, because please understand from this perspective that accessing CBS is not only restricted to the bank employees. CBS is being accessed by the customers, the employees, the ATMs, so many different avenues of banking, right? So we have to have two-factor authentication also, right? OTP, we can have OTP, then we can have fingerprint scan, etc. Okay, now again, we have to have the banks need to have a password management policy. You must have seen this, guys, that you cannot keep in a five characters password. It should be minimum of 8 characters. It should have an alphabet, capital letter, then a special character, one number, etc. So this is the password management policy, and periodically you need to change the password also, right? So maybe your login password you need to change after 3 months. Your transaction password, perhaps you need to change it after every 30 days. It depends from bank to bank. The policies vary from bank to bank. Okay, as an employee also, perhaps the employees also needs to regularly change their passwords. Okay, so it says implementation of password management policy to provide guidance on creating and using passwords in ways that maximize security of the password and minimize misuse or theft of the password. So you all know the various banks, they have different policies with respect to password management. Okay, now training should also be given to employees, that they, because we are dealing with the topic of cyber security, that as an employee we should not open any link from an unwanted email, from an unauthorized source, etc. So if any links and all come into the email of the bank authorized email, the employee shouldn't click it. Okay, so effective training of employees to educate them to strictly avoid clicking any links received via email. Similarly, as a customer also, you are also being educated on this. You all, so many times you receive SMS that the bank is not going to ask you for passwords, you shouldn't open any link which says something about money and all, right? Okay, next. Okay, then we have required to conduct effective due diligence and oversight to thoroughly assess the credentials of vendors, third-party service providers, and making non-disclosure and security policy compliance agreements. Now, in case of banks, what happens? Please understand it. Let's say in case of ATMs, if something goes wrong with the ATM, the bank will have a contract with a service provider who comes and basically fixes the ATM. So all those vendors who are connected with the banks, of course they can also do some mischievous act, right? So there has to be a proper due diligence of the vendor, that okay, he's a reputed vendor, he has been into this industry and all, and of course there has to be a proper agreement with the vendor, a non-disclosure agreement, that they are going to keep things confidential, etc. Non-disclosure agreements, they need to abide by the security policy, compliance agreements, etc. Okay, now if let's say there is an IT person who has come and who has gone to the server room, he needs to keep the bank needs to keep a log as to who accessed the server room, at what time did he access, all these things, all this are part of the controls. Okay, then any change, if there is any change in the application, the banks need to have a change management process. What do you mean by change management process? The changes needs to be there should be a need of change. The changes needs to be approved. The changes needs to be tested first before implementing. This is change management process. Okay, then we have configuration management process. So robust configuration management process to register changes to business applications, support technology, service components, and facilities. Configuration is basically the settings. Okay, so if there are any changes, there has to be proper changes in the settings of the software also. Configuration management process, not everyone should be allowed to make changes in the basic settings of the software. Okay, so all these points, configuration point, change management, we have been covering this aspect. If you remember ERP also, I told you all this. Okay, then again, for the application, they need to have, I was discussing the disaster recovery. This was with respect to disaster recovery center. We need to have a backup of the entire disaster recovery hot site. Okay, but then if there are minor incidents, and also the bank should have incident response mechanism in place to take appropriate action in case of any cyber security incident, with well written incident response procedure elaborating the roles of staff handling such incidents. So if there is any incident, if a customer lodges a complaint, if there is some hacking in his account, and also the bank should have proper procedures, basically written procedures as to how they are going to handle this particular case. Okay, and then of course audit log should be maintained pertaining to user actions, and an alert mechanism to monitor any change in the log settings. So if somebody tries to make changes in the logs, access logs and all, there should be proper reporting mechanism. Okay, there should be ways to that there is an alert, basically alert mechanism should be there. And of course you all know this, guys, that if you as a user also are trying to access CBS, you make more than 3 attempts of incorrect password and all, the account gets blocked. So this is again a security mechanism, right? So very easy point, but yeah, these are newly added, guys, so just go through it. Very simple. I feel again a question can be asked frame from this part. So with this, guys, chapter 5 so-called amendments is also done. Okay.